Welcome back to Cosmic Wand, where the great what-ifs come alive. Today's adventure, Harry absorbed every headmaster buried beneath Hogwarts, and a voice said, "Legacy inherited." If you haven't yet, go on and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Wardens door the castle had been trying to tell Harry something for 11 days. He counted them the way other boys counted detentions. It began the night the Hogwarts Express hauled its long yellow lights into the valley, and the sorting hats and the feast and the noise. And then, when the noise thinned and the corridors emptied, a low note underneath everything. Not a sound, a pressure behind the sound. It lived in the stone the way cold lives in iron, and when Harry laid his palm against the wall outside Gryffindor Tower on the first night back, the wall had answered him. Not with words. With a kind of leaning, the way a dog leans into a hand it has decided to trust. He told no one. That too was new. A younger Harry would have carried the thing straight to Ron and Hermione and spilled it across a corner table in the common room, and the three of them would have worried at it together until it either made sense or made trouble. But a younger Harry had not yet learned how quickly a shared secret becomes a committee, and how a committee, loving or not, slows a man down, so he sat with it. Turned it over in the pauses of ordinary days and let it teach him its edges. The ordinary days went on around him, indifferent and bright. On the 8th morning he sat through Transfiguration with the pull thrumming faintly under the flagstones, and turned a beetle into a button and back again with a flick so clean that Professor McGonagall paused over his desk and looked at him for a moment longer than the button warranted. "Neat work, Potter," she said. "Neater than last term. You've been practicing." "A bit," Harry said, which was true and was not the truth, and she moved on, and Ron leaned across the aisle with his own beetle, still stubbornly a beetle, and hissed, "How'd you get the legs to go? Mine keeps the legs." "You're rushing the middle of it," Harry said, and heard himself say it, and did not know until it was out of his mouth that he knew why Ron's transfiguration kept the legs. He had simply looked at the wand movement and seen the fault in it the way you see a loose thread on a jumper. "Slow the turn, let the shape finish arriving before you fix it. You're trying to arrive and land at the same time." Ron tried it. The legs went. He stared at the button on his desk like it had insulted him. "Since when do you talk like Hermione?" "I don't talk like Hermione," Harry said. "You just said let the shape finish arriving." Ron shook his head and pocketed the button, which was against the rules, and grinned, which was Ron. "Spooky. Keep it up. We'll all pass." At lunch the pull was stronger. The great hall stood over the deepest part of the old castle. Harry would understand later, and he had felt it there most of all without knowing why. A low, steady insistence under the long tables and the noise and the smell of shepherd's pie, and twice he caught himself with his palm flat against the ancient oak of the bench, pressing, listening, before he noticed what his own hand was doing and made it stop. Hermione noticed the second time. Hermione noticed most things. "You keep doing that," she said. She had a book propped against the water jug, which was also against the rules, and her eyes came up over the top of it, sharp and mild at once. "Touching things, the wall on the stairs this morning, the bench now. Are you feeling all right?" "Bit of a headache," Harry said. "The castle's noisy." "The castle isn't noisy. The castle is 1,000 years old and made of stone. That's what I mean." He smiled at her to take the strangeness out of it, and she let it go, because there were 100 small strangenesses to Harry Potter, and she had long ago learned to spend her worry on the ones that mattered. But she marked it. He saw her mark it. He was learning to see when people marked things, another new edge on an ordinary day. That was the shape of it, those 11 days. He passed his classes with a growing, secret ease. He felt the pull deepen. He kept his hand off the walls in company and put it to the walls in private, on the empty stairs at dawn, in the alcove behind the tapestry on the 4th floor, and each time the stone leaned into him, and each time something in him leaned back and wanted with a patience that unsettled him more than any sudden hunger could have, because sudden hunger burns out, and this did not burn. It waited. It had, he would learn, been waiting for 900 years, and 11 days was nothing to it, and he had begun to keep its time. By the 11th night he had stopped pretending he could sleep through it. He went down through the tower in his socks, boots in one hand, wand in the other, and the Marauder's map folded against his ribs beneath his jumper where the warmth of him kept the parchment soft. He was 16, and he moved through Hogwarts after curfew the way a fish moves through water it was born in. Filch's routes he knew. The trick step on the 4th landing he cleared without thinking. The suit of armor near the charms corridor that liked to hum tunelessly at passers-by he silenced with a flick and a whispered word before it could betray him, and it subsided with a grateful little clank, with the air of something that had only wanted permission to be quiet. He was good at this. He had earned being good at it. 5 years of practice, of near misses and clean escapes, of a body that had grown into itself over the summer and now did what he asked without arguing. There was a pleasure in that competence that he did not examine too closely, because when he examined it he found something underneath that felt like hunger, and hunger in Harry's experience was a thing best kept fed in quiet rather than looked at directly. The pressure in the stone drew him down. It was not the chamber. He had thought of that first, of course, the old cold pull of Parseltongue, and had gone so far as to press his ear to the second-floor lavatory door and listen. Nothing, whatever spoke to him, now spoke in an older language than snakes. It led him past the entrance hall, past the kitchens and the wide, warm ghost of bread that hung in the lower corridors even at 2 in the morning, down a service stair he had walked 100 times, and then off it, through an arch he could have sworn had been a blank wall the week before. He stopped at the arch. The map, when he unfolded it and touched his wand to it and murmured the words, showed him the whole castle and its ink-black bones. It showed the dots of the sleeping and the wandering. It showed Mrs. Norris 2 floors up and Professor Sprout returning late from the greenhouses, and a knot of Hufflepuff first-years who had gotten themselves lost near the trophy room and would, Harry judged, be found and marched to bed within the hour. It showed everything the marauders had ever mapped. It did not show the arch. It did not show the stair beyond it, which fell away into a dark that the map rendered as nothing at all, a smooth blank margin where the parchment simply declined to remember that anything existed. Harry ran his thumb along the edge of that blankness. The ink there was cold, not cold like winter, cold like the inside of a bell an instant after it has been struck when the note has left and the metal grieves it. "All right," he said very quietly to no one. "All right." He went down. The stair was old in a way the rest of the castle was not. Hogwarts was 1,000 years of accumulation, of towers grafted onto towers and staircases that had learned to move, because generations of witches and wizards had wanted, on some deep level, for the building to be alive. But this stair had not been added to anything. It had been carved before there was a castle to add it to. The steps were worn to shallow bowls in their centers, and the walls held no torches, no brackets, no soot, only the smooth living rock and a faint mineral shimmer that gave off no light of its own and yet let him see, the way you can see the shape of a room by the memory of it after the candle gutters. The pressure grew as he descended. It was not menacing. That was the strange thing, the thing he would try and fail to explain to himself for a long time afterward. It was welcoming in the way of a house that has been kept swept and aired for a guest who is decades overdue. He passed a landing where the rock had been cut into a bench, and on the bench sat a single clay lamp unlit, its wick long since crumbled to a black thread. He passed a place where the wall had been inscribed with a spiral of characters he did not know, worn nearly smooth, and when he brushed them the spiral warmed under his fingers and the warmth traveled up his arm and settled behind his sternum like a swallowed coal. At the bottom of the stair there was a door. It was not made of wood. It was a single slab of the same pale living stone, taller than a man and half again as wide, and it was carved from top to bottom with a scene that Harry's eye could not take in all at once. Figures. Robed figures, dozens of them, arranged in a great descending procession, and above them a shape that might have been the castle and might have been a crown, and below them, at the very base of the door where the stone met the floor, a darkness the carver had rendered by not carving at all. A smooth black absence with a single thin line running through it, like a wound that had been stitched by someone who knew they would not have the thread to spare a second time. Harry raised his wand. He meant to speak the word for light, the plain small charm he had known since he was 11. The word never came. Across his vision, hanging in the air between him and the door as though the dark itself had been ruled into neat lines and set with letters, a message wrote itself. Warden's threshold detected. He did not move. He had seen a great many strange things in his life and had learned that the correct response to most of them was stillness while you worked out whether they intended to kill you. The letters hung there, pale gold, sharp-edged, unhurried. They did not flicker. They had the quality of something typeset by a very patient hand. A second line unrolled beneath the first. "Scanning inheritor, please hold." "Hold what?" Harry said. His voice came out steadier than he had any right to expect. Talking to it seemed both absurd and exactly correct, the way talking to the castle had seemed absurd and correct on the first night. The letters did not answer him. They were not, he understood, a conversation. They were a readout. Something was measuring him, and it had the courtesy or the indifference to show its working. Inheritor identified, Potter Harry James. Magical lineage confirmed. Warden lineage dormant, eligible. Binding of the roll intact. Seal of the hollow degraded. Integrity 61% and falling. The last line stayed longer than the others. It glowed a fraction brighter, holding a beat longer than the rest, making certain he had read it, and then it, too, faded, and the door before him made a sound. It was the softest sound Harry had ever heard a large thing make. A sigh of stone against stone, weight settling off weight, and the great carved slab drew back from him and to the side, sliding into a recess in the wall he had not seen, and the mineral shimmer that had lit his way down the stair poured through the widening gap and swelled all at once into light. He had thought of it afterward as walking into the inside of a struck bell, and that was closer than any other words he found, but it was not right either. Bells are hollow. This was full. Chamber beyond the door was vast in the way of natural things rather than built ones, a cavern that had been coaxed rather than cut, its ceiling lost in a soft high dark that the light did not trouble to reach. And along its length, ranked on either side of a central aisle worn smooth by feet Harry could not begin to number, stood the beds of the dead. That was the only word his mind could find for them, and it was wrong, and he knew it was wrong even as he thought it, because there was nothing of the grave here. Each was a slab of the pale stone, waist high, and each held a recumbent figure carved so finely that in the swimming light the carving seemed to breathe. A woman in a healer's robe, her stone hands folded over a stone bundle of herbs. A man narrow as a blade, his stone face turned in profile toward the aisle with an expression of aristocratic, everlasting boredom. A broad figure whose carved hands gripped the carved edges of a shield. Row upon row of them receding into the light, and above each, hanging in the air of its own accord, a steady point of that gold fire, and the whole cavern hummed, and the hum was the pressure Harry had been feeling for 11 days, and it was the sound of them. There were details the eye caught and could not let go of. The healer's stone bundle of herbs had been carved with such fidelity that Harry could name the plant Dittany, its leaves rendered leaf by a hand that had loved the subject. The blade-narrow man wore a signet on one folded finger, and the seal of the signet was a raven, and someone had cut into the base of his slab, in a script Harry could half read, a single sardonic word that might have been a name and might have been a verdict. Further on lay a figure Harry took at first for a suit of armor until he saw the face inside the carved helm, a woman's face, broad and iron and utterly without patience, her stone gauntlets crossed over a stone portcullis, dead mid-command, and expecting the command to be obeyed regardless. And everywhere over everything the light, not falling from above like the light of the world but rising gently from the stone itself, as though the rock had been steeped in some slow luminous patience and gave it back drop by drop across the centuries to keep faith with the dead who had asked so much of it. The air smelled of nothing at all, that was its own kind of wonder. Not of dust, not of damp, not of the Swedish rot Harry's imagination had readied him for on the stair down. It smelled the way high cold places smell, of stone and distance and the absence of anything that could decay, and it lay on the tongue clean as spring water, and Harry breathed it and felt it settle in him and understood that whatever kept the light burning kept everything else at bay as well. Time did not run in this hall the way it ran above. Time was a guest here and had been asked courteously and absolutely to wait outside. He understood, standing there, whose these were. He had walked past their portraits 100 times, everyone had. The headmasters and headmistresses of Hogwarts hung in their frames in the round office at the top of the spiral stair, dozing and gossiping and pretending to doze, and Harry had thought of them, when he thought of them at all, as furniture that could talk. He had never once wondered where the paintings had come from, where the originals had gone. They had come here. Down under the roots of the castle they had all served, into the deep chamber where the shimmer never dimmed, and they had lain down on their beds of living stone, and something had kept the light burning above each of them for 1,000 years. Legacy rest, the Wardens Hall. Interred, 91. Available for inheritance, 91. Proceed. Harry walked forward. He did not decide to. His feet had already decided. The aisle drew him the way the pressure had drawn him down the stair, and he passed the healer with her herbs and the blade-narrow man with his boredom, and something in him catalogued them the way a starving man catalogues a laid table, not with greed exactly but with a terrible attentiveness, and the gold fire above each of them dipped as he passed, in acknowledgment, perhaps, or in appetite of its own. As he passed the sleepers, the system named them, quietly, a thin gold line surfacing above each and sinking again once he had read it, a librarian walking a step ahead and turning up the spines. Above the healer with her carved Dittany, DILYSDRWNT, the mercy of St. Mungo's legacy, the healing ARTS. Above the blade-narrow man with his raven signet and his everlasting boredom, PHINEASNIGLLUS black, the subtle tongue. Legacy, the reading of minds and men. Above the iron woman with her portcullis, UPRXIA mole, the iron matron. Legacy, the defense of the walls. Harry read each and did not stop, though something in him wanted to stop at every one, wanted to lay his hand on each bed and take what was offered and keep taking until there was nothing left in the hall unoffered, and he recognized the want for what it was and made himself walk on. Brackenmore first. The warden founder had said stand up straight under one before you dream of 90, and Harry had already decided, somewhere on the stair down, that he would do this as he did everything he meant to survive, in the right order with his eyes open. At the far end of the hall the bed stopped and there was a single slab set apart, older than the rest, its stone darker, its carving all but effaced by time. He could just make out a figure with broad shoulders and both hands laid flat and open upon its own chest, palms down, the way a man holds a wall that is trying to fall. Above it burned the largest of the gold fires, and as Harry came to stand before it the fire steadied and brightened and the letters wrote themselves once more. First of the roll, ALDOUSBRACKNMO. Title, The Warden Founder. Died in the 947th year, holding the stone. Legacy, the foundation. Wardcraft, stone song, the architecture of the deep. Inherit, what happens if I say yes? Harry asked the air. The air, for the first time, seemed to consider him. The gold fire pulsed once slow, like a held breath let go. You become more than you were. It was not a comforting answer, and Harry did not want a comforting answer. He wanted the true one, and he judged, on no evidence he could have named, that this was it. He looked down at the effaced stone face of Aldous Brackenmore, the Warden founder, dead 900 years, palms pressed forever against a falling weight, and he thought of the line that had glowed a fraction too bright. Seal of the Hollow, degraded. Integrity 61% and falling. Whatever these dead had held, they had held it so that others would not have to, and the holding was failing. He made himself slow down and think it through, because the pull wanted him to say yes, and a thing that wanted him to say yes was a thing to be examined before he obeyed it. He set out the facts cold, as he had learned to before a match he was about to fly. 1. Something under Hogwarts needed holding, and had needed holding for 1,000 years, badly enough that 91 witches and wizards had given the shape of their lives to the keeping of it. 2. The keeping was measured and the measure was dropping, and no one above the ground appeared to know or to be doing anything about it. 3. The thing that measured it had scanned him, named him, and opened a door that a map made by 4 of the cleverest troublemakers the school had ever produced could not so much as see. It had been built to find someone. It had found him. That was either the largest coincidence of his life or it was not a coincidence at all, and Harry had stopped believing in coincidences of that size somewhere around his 11th birthday. The risk was obvious and he did not pretend it away. He was being invited to let something old and enormous into himself, on the word of a voice that admitted freely that it was not a comforting one. But the alternative was to walk back up the stair and pretend he had felt nothing for 11 days and let the measure keep dropping and wait, as Brackenmore would put it, for a wiser man who was not coming. Harry had waited for rescue before. He had learned what waiting for rescue cost and who paid it. Yes, Harry said. The fire came down into him. There was no pain, and this surprised him for years that there was no pain. There was only the sudden knowledge of stone. It arrived the way sight arrives to someone who has been blind from birth and is suddenly, at the touch of a wand, given the whole visible world in a single unmanageable flood, and Harry staggered under it, one hand flying out to catch the edge of the slab, and where his palm met the stone met him back. He felt the castle. Not the halls he walked, not the classrooms and the towers, but the thing beneath them, the vast patient logic of load and thrust and counterthrust by which 1,000 years of masonry stood up against the pull of the earth. He felt the great arches of the great hall bearing down, and the flying buttresses answering them, and the foundation stones, each the size of a cart, socketed one into another with a cunning that made his teeth ache with its beauty. He felt the wards laid into the walls like veins of ore, the old defenses, the enchantments against apparition and fire and flood, and he felt where they had frayed, where a stone had shifted a hair's breadth in some century and the pattern had gone thin, and he knew, without being told, how to sing it back into true. And behind the knowledge came the years. Not as pictures, not as any tidy pageant of memory a man might narrate, but as sediment, as the slow packed weight of 9 centuries of one man's attention laid down layer upon patient layer, the way silt becomes stone. Harry felt winters he had not lived, felt the castle raw and half-built with the wind screaming through unglazed windows and the founders young and quarreling somewhere overhead, felt the deep contentment of a wall set true and the sick lurch of a foundation found wanting in the dark before dawn. He felt what it was to love a made thing with the whole of a life, to give a life to the loving of it, and to lie down at the end still holding, palms flat, against the weight. It poured into him and it did not drown him, and afterward he could never say why it had not drowned him, except that Brackenmore had spent 900 years learning to carry weight, and the first thing he taught, before stone song or ward sense or any craft at all, was how to be a vessel that bends and does not break. That was the word that came to him, unbidden and exactly right, stone song. The deep architecture had a voice, and now he had the ear for it, and more than the ear, the throat. He opened his eyes. He had not known they were closed. Legacy inherited. ALDOUSBRACKNMOR, the Warden founder. You have received stone song, ward sense, the architecture of the deep. Wardens inherited, one of 91, and beneath his own hand, beneath his own thundering pulse, a voice that was not the system's cool typeface, but something warmer and vastly older, a voice like a landslide slowed to the speed of speech. So, said Aldous Brackenmore. The boy comes at last. Harry did not answer. He was busy not falling down. The voice was inside him, and yet he heard it clearly, the way you hear your own thoughts and yet know absolutely that a thought was not your own. It carried the weight of the mountain the castle stood on. When it spoke of years, it spoke of them the way a river speaks of the banks it has worn down as facts long since made peace with. You are wondering whether I am a ghost, said Brackenmore. I am not. Ghosts are the print of a life pressed too hard into the world, the way a boot prints mud. I am the print of a purpose. When they laid me here, they took what I knew of holding and they made of it a legacy, so that when the holding grew too great for any single hand, it might be shared out and shared again down the years until at last it could be gathered. A pause, and Harry felt the great slow attention of him turn and settle and weigh. Gathered into one who could carry all of it, you feel the seal failing. You felt it before you knew what you felt. The hollow, Harry said, the line about the hollow. Later, said Brackenmore, and it was not a refusal but a discipline, the answer of a builder who does not raise the roof before the walls. First, you must learn to stand up straight under a single legacy before I let you dream of 90. Feel the floor beneath your feet. Harry felt the floor beneath his feet. He had never in his life felt a floor so completely. He felt it as a made thing, cut and set, and he felt the living rock beneath the made thing, and beneath that the slow, cold pressure of the deep earth, and he understood all at once the difference between standing on the ground and being held up by it. The distinction seemed suddenly to be the most important thing anyone had ever taught him. Good, said Brackenmore. Now, sing to the seam behind you, the one you passed on the stair where the spiral is worn. It has slipped, a hair. It will not fall in your lifetime or your grandchildren's, but a warden mends the small before it grows to the great. That is the whole of the craft in the end, attend to the small. Harry turned. Somewhere far above and behind, up the impossible stair, he could feel it now that he had the ear for it, the spiral of worn characters, and behind them the place where one course of stone had shifted a fraction against its neighbor, a hair's breadth infidelity in a wall that had kept faith for 1,000 years. He did not know how to sing to it, and then he did because Brackenmore knew, and Brackenmore was, for this moment, a lodger in the house of him, and the knowing was there to be used like a tool left ready on a bench. Harry drew breath. He did not open his mouth. The song was not made of air. It was made of intention shaped to the frequency of the stone, and it left him the way heat leaves a fire, and it went up the stair and found the seam, and it said, in the only language the stone had ever spoken, come back. Far above, a wall settled a hair's breadth into true. The whole cavern rang with it, one clean note, and every gold fire above every carved sleeper brightened in answer, 91 small suns flaring in the dark, and Harry stood at the heart of them with his hand on the bed of the warden founder and felt, moving through the great structure of the school, the small correction propagate outward like a ripple in a pond that has been still for centuries and had forgotten it could move. The emotion that took him then he would only ever allow himself to name once in the privacy of his own skull, before he put it away where it could not make him foolish. It was joy. There, said Brackenmore, and something in the landslide of his voice had shifted, warmed, gone from assessment to the first faint edge of approval. You have a warden's ear, or the beginning of one, most do not. Most who come this far can be taught to hear the stone but never to speak to it, and a warden who cannot speak is a watchman with no voice, useful for raising the alarm and nothing else. A pause. You spoke on the first night. That is worth remembering when the doubt comes for you, as it will. Tell me what a warden is, Harry said, properly, not the shape of it, the thing itself. The great attention settled over him, and Harry had the sense of being measured against some standard he could not see, and found provisionally adequate. A warden is the one who stands between the school and what the school was built to cage, said Brackenmore. You have been taught, I imagine, that Hogwarts was raised by 4 who wished to teach. That is true. It is not all of the truth, and the part they leave out is the part I gave my death to. They did not choose this valley for its beauty, boy. They chose it because something was already here, sunk in the rock, older than their names or mine, and it could not be moved and it could not be killed, and so they did the only thing that could be done with a thing that cannot be moved or killed. They built a house over it, and they set a keeper on the door, and they called the keeper warden, and the first warden was me. Harry looked down the long aisle at the 90 beds receding into the risen light, and did the arithmetic he did not want to do. And when the keeping got too heavy for one, it was shared, down the years, keeper to keeper, each laying by his portion so the next need not carry the whole. 91 of us, and the weight divided 91 ways, and it held. The voice lowered, and the lowering was worse than any shout. It holds no longer. The line has thinned. There has not been a true warden in this castle for longer than there should have been, only stewards who kept the office and never learned the craft, and the portions have begun to fail one by one, the way a rope fails strand by strand before it fails all at once. 61 the number said. When it began to fall I do not know. I know only that it is falling, and that the door found you, and that a door such as this does not open for the idle. Do you understand what I am telling you? That it's my problem now, Harry said. That it is your inheritance now, said Brackenmore. The two are not so different as you are young enough to think. Enough for a night, he said. You will feel every stone in the castle now for a while until you learn to close the ear when you do not need it. Do not fight it. Let it teach you the shape of what you serve. Come again when the moon has turned, and I will teach you to read the seal, and then you will understand what we have kept and from what. The others, Harry said. He looked back down the long aisle at the ranked sleepers, the healer, the blade-narrow man, all the 90 receding into the light. You said gathered, all of them into one, into me. If you are equal to it, said Brackenmore, and there was no unkindness in it and no flattery either, only the level assessment of a man who had spent a life deciding which stones would bear weight and which would crack. 91 lives, Harry Potter. 91 crafts and cunnings and mercies and cruelties, 91 whole and separate wills, and every one of them accustomed to being the master of this place. You would take them all inside a skull that has not yet finished growing, and you would remain yourself while doing it, or you would not remain at all. Wiser men than you have looked at this hall and turned back up the stair and been right to. The great slow attention weighed him one final time. But the seal is at 61 and falling, and there is no time to wait for a wiser man. So, we shall see what you are made of. Go up, sleep if you can. You cannot. He could not. Harry climbed the stair with the whole castle singing quietly in his bones. He knew now, without the map, exactly where he was in the great structure of the school, the way you know where your own hand is in the dark. When he reached the arch, it was a blank wall again behind him, and he pressed his palm to it out of a courtesy he could not have explained, and the wall leaned into his hand, and he leaned back. The corridors on the way up were the corridors he had always walked, and they were entirely different, because now he could feel the load of every arch he passed under and the patient answer of every buttress, and the castle that had been a home to him was revealed as a made thing of staggering, deliberate genius, held up by 900 years of witches and wizards who had loved it enough to keep singing it true. He put his hand on the cold banister of the moving staircase and felt where a joint had begun ever so slightly to work loose, and he did not mend it, because Brackenmore had said enough for a night, and Harry could feel already how the singing had cost him, a pleasant deep tiredness in the marrow of him like the ache after a day's hard flying. He tested the ear once more on the way, gently, the way you test a sore tooth with your tongue to learn the size of the ache. He stopped in the middle of the 7th-floor corridor, the empty stretch of it, tapestries breathing faintly in a draught, and he let the ear open, and the corridor unfolded for him into its hidden logic. He felt the great transverse beam above the ceiling, oak turned by centuries nearly to stone, bearing the dormitories overhead. He felt the two spots where the floor he stood on had been repaired, once with skill and once without, and he could tell the difference between them with his eyes shut, the honest join and the lazy one, as clearly as he could tell a true friend from a flatterer. He felt 3 walls over the long blank stretch where a room existed that was not a room, a space folded and folded again until the castle itself was not sure of it, and his new ear brushed the edge of that folding and flinched from it, not in fear but in respect, the way a hand draws back from the mouth of a very deep well. The room of requirement some part of him supplied. He had not known it lived there. He knew now. He knew where everything lived. It was too much, and it was wonderful, and it was going to be a very great deal of trouble, and Harry closed the ear, or tried to, and managed to bring it down from a roar to a murmur, and went on. He was 3 landings from Gryffindor Tower when he passed the gargoyle. It guarded the headmaster's office, squat and stony, and at this hour asleep, or as asleep as such things get. He had passed it 100 times. He passed it now with his new-made ear wide open, and so he felt what he would otherwise never have felt. The faint, particular signature of the wards that laced the spiral stair beyond the gargoyle, wards old and layered and very, very good, and threaded all through them, fresh as this morning, a working of watchfulness that had been renewed by a living hand within the day. Someone in that office kept the wards of the castle with care. Someone in that office would, sooner or later, feel a wall settle a hair's breadth into true in the small hours of the night and wonder who had sung to it. Harry stood very still before the sleeping gargoyle. High up on the far side of the wall in the round office at the top of the stair, a portrait stirred. He could not see it. He felt it, as he now felt everything the castle held, a slight shift of attention in the wardnet, a canvas turning in its frame. One of the 91 awake in oils while its original slept in stone below. He wondered which. He wondered whether it had felt the note ring through the school and known it for what it was, a warden's song sung by a hand that had no right yet to the craft. He wondered how long he had before the questions began. The portrait settled. The office beyond the wall was silent. But the watchfulness woven through the wards had a texture Harry recognized now that he had the sense for it, a signature as personal as handwriting, patient and kind and deep as a well, and not, under any circumstances, to be underestimated, and it belonged to the one man in Britain who had made a life study of the child Harry had been, and would now inevitably turn that study upon the man Harry was becoming. Albus Dumbledore kept his own wards, of course he did. And a man who kept the wards would, sooner or later, come looking for the hand that had begun uninvited to keep them too. Harry took his hand from the cold stone of the wall. The castle hummed to him, low and constant, 91 lights burning in the dark beneath his feet, 91 lives laid down and waiting, and one already gathered, already speaking, already teaching him the shape of what he had walked into. He would need to be careful. He turned the thought over on the last flight of stairs and found it solid. A man who kept the wards would notice a change in them, and Harry had already made one change, up on the stair where a wall now stood a hair truer than it had that morning, and he could not unmake it and would not have if he could, so he could not hide the fact of himself forever. He could only choose when it came out and to whom and on what terms, and that was a different game entirely, when Harry had grown up playing whether he wanted to or not, learn fast, draw as little notice as the work allowed, and when the notice came anyway, be far enough along that turning back was no longer a thing anyone could ask of him. The moon would turn in 19 days. He counted them on the way up as he had counted the 11, and found that he was, for the first time in a long while, looking forward to something. He went up to bed. He lay in the dark of the tower with the hangings drawn and Ron snoring 2 beds over and the ordinary sounds of an ordinary night, and beneath all of it, holding all of it up, the deep, slow architecture of the deep singing. He did not sleep. He listened. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The healer's hands. Learning to close the ear was harder than learning to open it. Brackenmore had warned him, and Brackenmore had been right, which Harry was discovering was a general condition of dealing with Brackenmore. For 3 days after the descent, the castle would not stop talking to him. He would be halfway through breakfast and feel, under the clamor of 400 students and the clink of cutlery, the patient thrust of the great hall's roof vaults bearing down and the walls answering, and the sensation would swell until it drowned the porridge and the post owls and Ron's running commentary on the Chudley cannons, and he would have to grip the edge of the table and breathe and count, the way you count to bring a racing heart to heel, until the roar sank back to a hum. He got better. He got better fast, which was itself a thing he noticed. The craft came with its own gift for being learned, as though Brackenmore had folded into the legacy not only the knowing but the knack of coming to know, so that every hour Harry spent listening taught him more than the last. By the 4th day he could open the ear and close it at will, the way you might cup a hand to catch a far sound and then let it fall. By the 6th he could keep it half open all day, a low awareness running beneath his thoughts, the castle's architecture present to him, the way the ground is present to a man who has walked a road so often he no longer looks down. The control cost him something, though he did not notice the price until Hermione named it for him. She found him in the library on the 5th evening, bent over a defense essay he had not written a word of, staring through the page at a middle distance, no book occupied. "You've gone somewhere again," she said, sitting down across from him. "You keep doing it. In Charms this morning, Flitwick asked you a question 3 times and you answered the first one, which was a different question, and got it right anyway, which frightened him more than getting it wrong would have." She studied him with the particular attention she saved for problems that would not resolve into references. "Whatever you're carrying, Harry, you don't have to carry it alone, that's all. I'm not going to make you tell me. I'm just going to sit here and remind you it's an option." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to him in weeks, and it very nearly worked. He looked at her, at the frank, worried steadiness of her, and the whole weight of the last 3 weeks pressed up behind his teeth, wanting out. Then he thought of the door a map could not see, and of 91 lives laid down in the dark, and of what it would do to Hermione to know that her friend had begun collecting them, and he swallowed the impulse the way he was learning to swallow all of them cleanly without letting it show on his face. "I know it's an option," he said. "Thank you, really, it's nothing I can't handle, I've just been sleeping badly." "You've been sleeping badly for 5 years, Hermione said, but she let it go because letting go at the right moment was one of her rarer and more valuable talents, and she pulled out her own essay and wrote in a companionable silence beside him until the bell, and Harry got 3 sentences down and heard, under the scratch of her quill and the settling of the great library beams overhead, the north dungeons grinding another knuckle-width toward ruin. He learned the school again from the inside out. He learned which staircases were sound and which were held up more by habit and enchantment than by any honest engineering. He learned that the astronomy tower swayed very slightly in a high wind and had been built to sway, a cleverness 9 centuries old that made him grin up at it in the dark. He learned the wards as veins of old fire in the walls, and where they ran thin, and where some later hand had patched them, well or badly. And he learned, walking the 3rd-floor corridor on the 7th morning with the ear half open, that there was a place in the castle where the stone was wrong. He felt it before he reached it, a coldness in the song, not the clean cold of deep rock which he had come to love, but a sour absence, a note that should have been there and was not, as if some length of the castle's nervous system had gone numb. It was faint. It was down and to the north, under the floor, below even the dungeons, and when he stood over it and reached down with the ear, the wrongness reached back, and Harry took his hand off the wall and stepped away and did not that morning go looking for its source. Brackenmore's warning was in him. Tend to the small before it grows to the great, but there was small and there was this, and Harry had lived long enough to know the difference between a thing you mendied and a thing you studied first from a safe distance. He studied it for 2 days. He walked past the place morning and evening with the ear cracked open a sliver, taking readings the way a healer takes a pulse, and each time the sour absence had grown, not much, a finger's width, a knuckle, but always outward, always north, always down. He tried once in the library to find anything the ordinary record held about the deep foundations of the school, and found precisely nothing, which was itself an answer, because a school that documented the migratory habits of the staircases and the dietary preferences of the resident poltergeist did not simply forget to write down what lay beneath its own dungeons. Someone had made sure there was nothing to find. Harry closed the book on a blank where a truth should have been, and understood that the silence around the deep was not an accident of history, but a policy of it, maintained, presumably, by the same careful hand that renewed the wards on the office stair. He nearly told Brackenmore. He went so far as to stand before the blank arch on the second night with his palm on the cold stone, and then he did not go down because he had promised himself the right order, and the right order was to wait for the moon and to arrive at the deep prepared rather than frightened. It was a reasonable decision. It was disciplined. He would spend a long time afterward wishing he had been less disciplined and more afraid. He should have studied it longer. Nia Fenwick was 13 years old and built like a whippet and could not, by common consent of the Gryffindor common room, sit still to save her life. She was a third year, and she had attached herself to Harry sometime the previous spring with the frank hero worship of a child who had decided a thing and did not intend to be argued out of it, and Harry, who found most hero worship a coat that itched, had somehow not minded hers. She asked him about Quidditch. She asked him to check her wand work. She had a way of appearing at his elbow with a question already halfway out of her mouth, and she laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, and she was, in the small unofficial economy of the tower, his. She was cutting through the third-floor corridor after supper on the 9th day when the floor took her. Harry was 2 corridors away, and he felt it happen. He felt the cold seam under the school give a lurch, a slippage, one course of deep stone grinding against another with a violence that had nothing to do with weight or load, and everything to do with that sour numb wrongness spreading a hand's breadth further than it had that morning. He felt the ward that laced the third-floor floor, and old working against subsidence, flare and gutter as the thing beneath it bit through, and he was running before he had decided to run, the ear thrown wide open, following the pain in the stone the way you follow a scream. He came around the corner into a scene the ordinary eye would have struggled to read. The corridor looked untouched, the torches burned, the portraits gossiped. And in the middle of the flagstones Nia Fenwick lay curled on her side, not bleeding, not burned, no bone out of true, and she was screaming in a thin, exhausted way that told him she had already been screaming for longer than her voice could bear. "Nia," he was on his knees beside her. "Nia, it's Harry, look at me, what happened, where does it hurt?" "Cold," she managed. Her eyes found him and did not focus. Her skin under his hands was the wrong temperature, not fevered, not clammy, but cold in patches, and the patches moved. "It's so cold, it's inside, make it stop, Harry, make it stop." 2 portraits were shouting for help. Somewhere a suit of armor had come clanking to life and gone lumbering off toward the staff room. Harry barely heard them. He had the ear open, and he had laid one hand flat against the flagstones, and he was reading the floor, and what the floor told him turned his stomach. The cold seam had opened a hairline mouth here, for an instant, one bad instant while Nia stood over it, and something had come up through that mouth. Not a creature, not a spell, an absence, a nothing that ate. It had touched her the way frost touches a leaf, and it had gone back down when the mouth closed, and it had left its cold behind in her, a splinter of unmaking lodged in a living girl, and the splinter was spreading. Madame Pomfrey arrived at a dead run with her wand already out. She was magnificent, and Harry, kneeling there useless, understood in about 4 seconds exactly how magnificent, and exactly how it would not be enough. She had Nia diagnosed before she had finished kneeling. She threw warming charms that should have driven any natural cold from a body in a heartbeat, and the cold ate them. She reached for the deep old healing magics, the ones that knit and mend and call the body back to its own true pattern, and they slid off the wound like water off glass, because the wound was not a wound in the ordinary sense, was not a tear in the pattern but a hole in it, a place where the pattern had simply been deleted, and you cannot mend a thing by teaching it to remember a shape when the shape itself has been unmade. "Poppy Pomfrey," said a voice inside Harry's skull, brisk and warm and appalled, "is the finest healer in this castle, and she's about to lose this child because she is fighting the wrong war." He had not called her. He understood in the part of him that stayed cold and clear in a crisis that he had not needed to call her, that the moment his need had aligned with her craft the whole hall of the dead had leaned toward him, and the one who could answer had woken and looked out through his eyes. Dilys Derwent. The mercy of St. Mungo's. He had read her name on the walk down and had not gone to her, and now she had come to him. "You cannot heal what has been unmade," Dilys said, fast, no time for reverence in her, all healer, all triage. "You can only wall it off and give the body back its own borders and let it grow across the gap. But you have not got my hands, boy, you have got your own 2 clumsy paws and a frighten you the size of the giant squid. So you will listen and you will do exactly as I say, and you will do it now, because that child has the length of about 40 breaths before the cold reaches the great vessels of her, and then no one heals her, not you, not Poppy, not I in my prime with the whole of St. Mungo's at my back. Do you hear me?" "I hear you," Harry said aloud, and Madame Pomfrey's head came up and her eyes went to him, and whatever she saw in his face made her go still. "Mr. Potter, I need to touch her," Harry said. "Please, I think I can help her. I don't have time to explain, and you won't believe me, and she's dying, please." Later he would wonder at himself, at the 16-year-old who said please to Poppy Pomfrey in a voice that was half his own and half 900 years of borrowed authority, and at Poppy Pomfrey, who was nobody's fool and had healed 2 wars worth of the impossible and knew, the way great healers know, the exact taste of the moment when the ordinary tools have failed and something must be tried or the patient is lost. She looked at him. She looked at Nia. She moved her hands aside. "Do it," she said. Whatever it is, and Merlin help you if you make it worse. Dyles taught him through his own hands. It was not like the stone song. The stone song had been a voice going out. This was a listening turned into a shaping, a laying on of attention so fierce and so precise that it became a kind of touch. Harry set both palms flat on Nia's cold splintered ribs, and Dyles reached down through him, and together they read the girl the way Brackenmore had taught him to read a wall. He felt the borders of her, the living pattern of a 13-year-old body, blood and breath, and the small, quick engine of a heart working too hard. And he felt the whole. The place where the cold had eaten a coin-sized absence out of the meat of her and was eating outward, slow and patient and utterly without malice, which was the worst of it, that it did not hate her, that it was simply a mouth and she was simply in the way. There, Dyles said, you see it, now you cannot fill it. Do not try to fill it, that is the mistake Poppy is making, and it is the correct mistake, the merciful one, and it is fatal. You are going to do the cruel thing instead. You are going to draw a line around the hole and tell the living flesh, this is the new edge of you, this and no further, grow here and let the rest go. You will lose the coin of her the cold has taken. You will save the girl, set the border. Use the same trick you used on the wall, the comeback, but aimed at meat instead of stone, and aimed not at what is gone but at what remains. Tell it where its edge is, tell it kindly, tell it now. Harry told it. He did not have the words for what he did, and he never would, though he would do it 100 times in the years to come and each time understand it a little better. He found the living edge of the wound, the place where Nia was still Nia, and he sang to it, not the stone song but its cousin, a healer's summons, and he told the flesh where it ended and asked it, with everything he had, to hold that line and heal inward from it and give up as lost the small dead coin the cold had claimed. And the flesh heard him. It was the strangest and most beautiful thing he had yet done, stranger than the wall, because stone is patient and flesh is willing, flesh wants to live. Flesh had only been waiting for someone to tell it how, and when he told it, it wept shut around the wound like a mouth closing on a held breath, sealing the cold splinter into a hard small knot of scar and shutting it away from the great vessels and the racing heart with a fraction of a second to spare. He felt the whole of it happen through the borrowed instrument of Dyles Derwent's craft, and the feeling was one he would spend years failing to describe to anyone who had not held a life in their two hands and refused to let it go. He felt the warmth come back into the cold places the way dawn comes back into a valley, edge by edge, low and gold and grudging at first, and then all at once. He felt the girl's own magic, the small, bright, unpracticed magic of a 13-year-old, wake to what he was doing and rush to help him, so that at the end he was not healing her so much as showing her body the door and standing aside while it walked through. And under all of it he felt Dyles herself, 300 years dead, leaning through him with a tenderness that had nothing soft in it, the tenderness of a woman who had watched 10,000 patients live and die and had decided somewhere in the middle of it that mercy was not a feeling but a skill, and could be taught and could be inherited, and could be lent to a shaking 16-year-old on a cold corridor floor when a child needed his hands steadier than they wanted to be. Nia Fenwick stopped screaming. She drew one long shuddering breath and then another, and the moving patches of cold under Harry's hands went still and began slowly to warm from the edges in, and her eyes found his, and this time they focused. That was horrible, she whispered. I know, Harry said. His hands were shaking. He noticed this from a great distance. I know, you're all right, you're going to be all right. Legacy inherited. DILYSDERWNT, the mercy of St. Mungos, you have received, the healing ARTS, the reading of bodies, the lore of herb and venom. Wardens inherited, 2 of 91. The words hung in the air over Nia Fenwick's white face where only Harry could see them, gold and calm and entirely out of keeping with the terror of the last 4 minutes, and beneath them Dyles Derwent settled back into the deep of him with the satisfaction of a craftsman who has salvaged a piece everyone else had written off. Not bad, she said, for a boy with clumsy paws. Now take your hands off her before Poppy has a seizure, and let a real healer do the aftercare, because you have kept her alive but you have not made her well, and the difference between those two things is a career, which you have not got. Off, off, Harry took his hands off. Madame Pomfrey moved in the instant he did, and her wand was already working, warming charms taking hold now that there was living flesh to warm and not a bottomless cold to feed, and she was murmuring the aftercare incantations and conjuring a stretcher and shouting without turning her head, for the portraits to fetch Professor McGonagall and to fetch her, in fact, the headmaster, and Harry knelt back on his heels in the middle of the third-floor corridor and let the ear fall shut and shook. Only for a moment, he made it only for a moment. And he got up because a warden who has just closed a wound in the world does not get to sit on the floor and shake while the people who saw him do it start asking questions, and he helped Madame Pomfrey settle Nia on the stretcher, and he answered the first careful questions with the first careful half-truths. And by the time McGonagall arrived at a near run with her tartan dressing gown thrown over her nightclothes, he had a version of events assembled that was not a lie and was very far from the truth. He had felt Nia was in trouble, he had run, He had done what he could, some old bit of healing he'd read. He wasn't sure it'd help. Thank Merlin, Madame Pomfrey came. He said it plainly, and he watched McGonagall not believe the shape of it while being unable to fault a single word, and he watched Madame Pomfrey, who had been there, who had moved her own hands aside, say nothing at all, which told him more about Poppy Pomfrey than a speech would have. She had questions. She was not going to ask them in a corridor in front of portraits. She was, above all, a woman who finished the job in front of her before she started the argument, and the job in front of her was a stretchered child, and so she took the child and went and left the argument for later. Later came the next morning, and it came from the top. Harry had been braced for McGonagall. What he got was a note, delivered at breakfast by a school owl in a hand he recognized from the bottom of 100 official parchments, thin and looping and precise. Mr. Potter, it read, I find myself with a lemon sherbet surplus and a curiosity that would benefit from company. Do call up when you have a moment this morning. The password is Pontefract Cake. Yours, Albus Dumbledore. Ron read it over his shoulder and whistled. What have you done? Saved Nia Fenwick's life, apparently, Harry said, which was true, and folded the note. Then why do you look like you're being called to Snape's office? Because it is not the ones who mean you harm that you have to worry about, Harry did not say. It is the ones who see you clearly. He ate his toast. He did not taste it. And when he had run out of toast and out of reasons, he climbed the marble stair and gave the gargoyle its ridiculous password, and rode the moving spiral up into the round office at the top of the castle, where 91 dead headmasters slept in oils on the walls, and one of them, he was fairly sure, had watched a wall settle true in the small hours 19 nights running, and reported it to the living man who kept the office now. Dumbledore was standing at the window with his back to the door when Harry came in, a long silver-gray shape against the morning, and he did not turn at once. Do you know, he said, I have been headmaster of this school for a great many years, and in all that time I have never once succeeded in learning where the castle keeps its ledger of favors. It grants them, you understand, it has moods. It likes some who walk its halls, and it merely tolerates others, and the ones it likes find that doors open a little easier for them, and stairs are a little kinder, and the winter corridors a little less cold. I have always assumed the affection was general, a castle's fondness for the young. Now he turned, and the blue eyes over the half-moon spectacles were mild and terrible and entirely without malice, which Harry was learning was the most dangerous thing a pair of eyes could be. But the castle has been unusually fond of someone these 3 weeks, Harry. It has been settling itself, grooming itself, one might almost say, the way a cat grooms when it is content. I felt it and could not find the cause. And then last night a wound opened in my school that should not exist, a wound of a kind I have hoped for 30 years never to see again, and a 16-year-old closed it with his bare hands before my own hospital matron could. I find I no longer have to look for the cause, I have only to invite it to tea. There was a chair, Harry sat in it. He had decided on the stairs how he would play this, and the plan survived contact with the room for about as long as such plans ever did, which was not long because Dumbledore was already 3 moves ahead and had been before Harry walked in. You know something's happening, Harry said. It was not a question, and he did not make it one. You knew before last night. You just didn't know it was me. I know a great many things are happening. It is the chief occupational hazard of my position. Dumbledore lowered himself into the chair across the desk, and up close the age of him showed, the way it never quite did at a distance, a tiredness worn deep as grain in old wood. I know that the deep of this castle has kept a certain silence for 1,000 years, and that the silence has begun, very lately, to be broken. I know that there are things beneath Hogwarts older than Hogwarts, and that they were bound here by hands I would not dream of matching, and that the binding was never meant to be eternal, only long. And I know, Harry, because I have made it my business to know, that once in a very great while the deep chooses someone. It reaches up and it puts its hand on a living heart and it says you, and the ones it chooses do not, as a rule, get to say no, nor, I have found, do they much want to. He folded his long hands on the desk. So, will you tell me what you have found, or must I go looking and risk breaking something in the search that a gentler question might have kept whole? It was beautifully done. Harry admired it even as he felt the pull of it, the invitation to unburden, the warmth, the implied and wholly genuine offer of help, all of it real and all of it also a hand extended to close, gently, around a thing Dumbledore did not yet control. And under the admiration, sharp and clear, the counsel of the man narrow as a blade whose bed Harry had not yet knelt beside, whose legacy he had not taken and whose voice he did not have, but whose cold example had been sitting in the hall of the dead teaching a lesson to anyone with the wit to read a signet ring. Tell a man like this everything and you have given him the map. Tell him nothing and you have declared a war you cannot win. Tell him something true and insufficient and let him think the insufficiency is fear rather than choice. I found a door, Harry said, under the castle. It opened for me. There are portraits down there after a fashion. He chose the word and let it stand, older than the ones up here, and they've been teaching me things, old magic. That's how I closed the wound. All true. All of it true and none of it the shape of the truth, and he watched Dumbledore watch him and knew that Dumbledore knew he was doing it, and that this too was part of the game, this mutual courteous knowledge that neither of them was showing the other his hand. Portraits, Dumbledore said. Yes, that will do for now. He rose and crossed again to the window, and for a moment he looked so old and so alone against the light that Harry felt the pull of a different impulse entirely, the impulse simply to tell him, to hand it all over to the one adult in his life who had never yet failed to know more than Harry did. He did not. He was learning not to. I will not command you to stop, Harry, because I do not think you could, and because I am not at all certain you should. But I will ask you 3 things, and I will ask you to weigh them, because I have watched a great many gifted young people mistake a beginning for an ending, and it has cost some of them everything. He held up one long finger. Go slowly. Whatever is being offered to you, it has waited 1,000 years, and it can wait for you to be ready. A second finger. Trust the thing you were before this began more than the thing it is making of you. When they start to disagree, come to me. A third. And when you are ready to tell me the truth, and not before, come to me for that also. The door will not have told you everything. I promise you it will not have told you everything. And the part it has left out is the part that has kept me awake for 30 years. Is that a threat? Harry asked evenly. It is a kindness, Dumbledore said, wearing a threat's coat because you are of an age to trust the coat more than the man. Go to your lessons, Harry. Nia Fenwick will make a full recovery, thanks to you, and you should let her thank you because you saved her and because you will need, in the time that is coming, to remember what saving feels like. He turned back to the window. That will be all. Harry went to his lessons. He did not, for a while, learn much in them. His mind was 3 floors down and 900 years deep, turning over everything the morning had shown him. And chief among the things it turned over was the wound itself and where it had come from and what it meant that the cold seam under the school had opened its mouth wide enough for one bad second to take a bite of a living child. He had felt the numbness spread a hand's breadth in a single week. He did the arithmetic and did not like the answer. 61%, the door had said. And falling, and now the falling had teeth and had used them on someone Harry had decided was his. The Daily Prophet arrived at lunch with the rest of the answer. He would not have noticed it if Hermione had not gone quiet over the front page, which was a thing Hermione did the way other people gasped. He looked. Ministry moves to secure SCHOOLS, said the headline, and beneath it, in the smaller print that always mattered more than the headline. A new Office of Educational Security, established by emergency measure, its remit to review the safety and the governance of magical Britain's places of learning, its authority to inspect, to monitor, and where necessary to intervene. And at the head of it, appointed that week, a woman whose moving photograph regarded the readers of Britain with a level, unsmiling patience that Harry recognized at once, because he had spent all morning across a desk from another pair of eyes that had looked at him exactly like that. Deputy Cordelia Ashgrove, said the caption, a former Auror. A woman, the article was at pains to note, of unimpeachable record and no particular politics, chosen precisely because she owed nothing to anyone and feared nothing that walked. There had been incidents, the article said without naming them, unregistered accumulations of dangerous magic. The ministry had learned, at terrible cost, what came of letting such things grow in the dark unwatched. It would not make that mistake again. It would look now wherever the dark grew thickest, and it would look first, said Deputy Ashgrove in the single quote the article afforded her, where the oldest and the deepest magics were kept. Where the oldest and the deepest magics were kept. Harry read the line twice. Then he folded the paper and passed it back to Hermione, and looked up the length of the great hall to the high table, where Dumbledore sat in his tall chair not eating, his gaze fixed on nothing, an old man carrying a weight Harry had glimpsed the edge of that morning, and was only beginning to understand the size of. Below them all, under the flagstones, under the dungeons, the cold seam waited with its patient numb mouth. And beneath even that, in the hall where time had been asked to wait outside, 89 more of the dead lay ready, each a life, each a craft, each a door. He would need all of them. He understood that now with the flat certainty of a sum that comes out the same no matter how you add it. He would need every one of the 89, and he would need to take them faster than Dumbledore wanted and quieter than Ashgrove would allow, and he would need to do it without losing the thing he had been before the deep put its hand on his heart, because that, Dumbledore had told him and Harry believed him, was the part that killed you. Nia Fenwick came to find him after supper, pale and thin and stubborn, out of the hospital wing against Madame Pomfrey's explicit orders, to tell him that the cold had gone and that she had a scar on her ribs shaped like a coin, and that it was, in her considered opinion, the best scar in Gryffindor. She made him look at it. She made him admit it was a good scar. She laughed at her own joke before she finished telling it, and Harry laughed too, and for the length of that laugh he was only a 16-year-old in a warm tower who had done a good thing, and not a warden with 89 graves to open and 2 governments learning his name. Then she went back to bed, and he sat by the common room fire long after the others had gone up, listening with the ear half open to the great architecture holding, and to the one cold place where it was not. And when the last log had fallen to embers and the tower had gone entirely to sleep, he got up and took his cloak and his wand and went down. The blank arch on the second floor became a door when he laid his hand on it, and the pale living stone drew back with its soft sigh of weight leaving weight, and Harry went down the worn stair into the rising light. The Wardens Hall received him the way a great room receives someone who belongs in it now, without ceremony, the 91 small suns burning steady in the dark, the cold clean air lying sweet on his tongue. He walked the aisle to the healer's bed, to Diley's Derwent with her carved dittany and her folded stone hands, and he stood over her. And he did not need to inherit her again because he had her already, but he had come to talk, and the deep, he was learning, would talk to those who came in good faith. You felt it in the child, Diley said, waking in him brisk as a slap of cold water. The cold that eats, you want to know what it was. I want to know what it is, Harry said. Present tense, it's still down there. It took a bite out of a 13-year-old and it's still growing, and nobody who lives up top will even write down that it exists. The landslide answered him from the far end of the hall, from the effaced bed of the warden founder, grave and slow. Because to name it in the daylight is to teach the young to fear the ground they stand on, said Brackenmore, and a school cannot be run by the frightened. So the office keeps the silence, as the office has always kept it, and the office is not wrong to. But you're past the silence now, Harry Potter. You crossed out of it the night the door opened, so I will give you the name, and you will carry it, and you will not speak it in the daylight either. The light in the hall dimmed a fraction, all 91 suns lowering together, and in the deeper dark the old voice laid the word down like a stone set into a wall. We called it the Hollow. It is not a beast, and it is not a spirit, and it is not a curse, though it wears the coat of all three by turns. It is an absence with an appetite. It was here before the founders, and it will be here after the last of us, and it cannot be killed because you cannot kill a whole. You can only bound it, wall it. Sit a keeper on its door and feed the wall year on year, so that the wall never thins to the width the Hollow can reach through. A pause, and the pause had weight. The wall is thinning. You have felt where that sour cold under the north dungeons is not a new wound. It is the old wall gone to lace, and the Hollow putting an eye to the lace and finding for the first time in 300 years that it can see through. Harry stood very still in the risen light. Then why is no one mending it? Dumbledore keeps the office. He renews the wards on the stair every morning. I've felt him do it. He knows about you, or knows enough. So why is the wall failing on his watch? Because renewing a ward is not the same as being a warden, said Dilys, and there was no cruelty in it, only the flat clinical mercy of a healer naming a terminal thing. That good man upstairs can tend the wall's outer courses with the finest wardcraft in Britain, and he does, and it buys years, and it is not enough because the wall was never made of wardcraft. It was made of us. 91 lives fed into it, portion by portion, keeper to keeper, and no living wizard alive knows how to lay in a fresh portion, because the last one who knew lay down on a stone bed 900 years before your Dumbledore was born. Her attention turned in him, sharp and sudden and kind. That is why the door opened for you, child, not to make you great, to make you the 92nd portion if you prove worthy of the laying in. And the laying in, historically, she stopped herself, and Harry felt her stop, felt the deliberate closing of a door she had opened by half an inch. That is a lesson for a later night. You are not ready for the shape of the cost, and I will not frighten a boy who has done a brave thing into thinking bravery is the same as being spent. Tell me the cost, Harry said. No, said Brackenmore, and the whole hall agreed with him, 91 lights steady and immovable. Not tonight. Tonight you have learned the name of the enemy and the nature of the wall, and that is a night's work and more. Go up, Harry Potter. The moon turns in 10 days. Come to me then, and I will begin to teach you to read the seal itself, and you will see with your own new eyes exactly how thin the lace has worn. Until then, mend the small. The north dungeons will hold 10 days. Sleep, or listen if you cannot sleep, but go up and take the north dungeons off your worry, for they are mine to watch until you are ready to watch them yourself. Harry went up. He climbed the worn stair with the name of the enemy sitting in him like the cold splinter he had shut away in Nia Fenwick's ribs, small and hard and impossible to forget. The Hollow. An absence with an appetite, older than the school, gnawing at a wall made of the dead, while a good and formidable man tended its outer courses and bought years he did not have and told no one, and a woman with an auror's eyes prepared to come looking where the deepest magics were kept. Harry reached the blank arch, and it was a wall behind him again, and he laid his hand on it out of the courtesy that had become a habit, and the wall leaned into his hand, tired, holding, glad of him. He leaned back, then he went up through the sleeping castle to the tower and lay in the dark and began methodically, without drama, to plan. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The portraits priced the ministry announced itself with a form. It came to every 4th year, and above at breakfast on the morning the moon turned full, a single sheet of official parchment that unrolled itself beside each plate and waited primly to be filled in. Educational Security Preliminary Assessment, it said across the top, and beneath that a series of questions in a typeface designed to be answered rather than read. Have you witnessed the use of any magic you believe to be beyond the sanctioned curriculum? Have you observed any student or member of staff behaving in a manner inconsistent with ordinary instruction? Do you know of any object, room, or practice within this school that has been kept from the knowledge of the Ministry of Magic? There was a space for a name at the bottom and a note in smaller print that assessment was voluntary and that the failure to assist a lawful inquiry while not itself an offense would be recorded. Harry read it twice. Then he read the room. 400 students bent over 400 identical sheets, and the sound of the great hall changed, quieted, took on the particular texture of a great many people deciding, all at once and separately, how honest they could afford to be. At the Slytherin table, a knot of older students were already scratching away with the relish of the well-connected. At the Gryffindor table, Ron had drawn a rude picture in the first answer box and was inviting Seamus to admire it. And down the bench Nia Fenwick sat with her quill poised over the question about magic beyond the curriculum, her scarred ribs under her jumper, her honest face working through a problem she was too young to have been handed, because she had witnessed exactly such magic on a corridor floor when a sixth year had put his hands on her and told her body where its edges were. Harry caught her eye down the table. He shook his head very slightly, not a command, a request. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she wrote in the box for that question in her round, careful hand the single word nothing and signed her name, and Harry understood that he had just accepted a debt he would have to be worthy of. They can't actually make us fill these in, Hermione said low, sliding her own sheet away half-finished. It says voluntary. It says it 3 times, which is how you can tell they'd very much rather it weren't. She had the particular set to her mouth she got when a rule was technically correct and morally rotten. It's the recording bit. Failure to assist will be noted. That's not a law, that's a list. They're building a list of who cooperates and who doesn't, and in a year that list will matter more than anything we actually wrote on the forms, because a list of the reluctant is a list of the interesting, and interesting is exactly what you don't want to be to a department like that. So what do we write, Ron said, if writing nothing puts us on the list and writing something puts us on a worse one? You write the boring truth, Harry said before Hermione could answer, and heard the certainty in his own voice and tried to make it sound less like a decision he had already made for reasons he could not share. Enough of it that you're clearly cooperating. None of it that they can use. Bury the one thing that matters under 10 things that don't. Ron looked at him oddly, and Hermione looked at him longer, and Harry looked back down at his form and felt the beginnings of a talent he had not yet paid for humming under his hands, ready. He filled in his own form with the truth. He filled in his own form with the truth, which was the only safe lie available to a man being read by professionals. Yes, he wrote, he had witnessed magic beyond the curriculum. The school was full of it, the moving staircases, the enchanted ceiling, the ghosts, the sorting hat. Yes, he had observed inconsistent behavior. Peeves the poltergeist behaved inconsistently as a matter of policy. No, he knew of no object or room kept from the ministry, which was a lie so total it circled back around to a kind of dare. He signed his name in a clear hand and rolled the parchment up and passed it to the waiting owl, and he thought, with a coldness that did not feel entirely like his own, that whoever read it would learn precisely nothing and would know, reading it, that they had been told nothing on purpose, and that this, too, was information, and that he would need to be cleverer than a form before the week was out. He had a way to become cleverer. It was sleeping in the dark under the castle with a raven on its finger and 300 years of contempt in its carved face. The moon had turned. Brackenmore had said, "Come to me when the moon has turned." Harry went that night. The descent had become a homecoming. He knew the worn stair now the way he knew the route to the Quidditch pitch, and the Wardens Hall opened its risen light to him in its clean cold air, and the 91 suns burned steady in the vault, and Harry walked the aisle to the effaced bed of the Warden Founder and stood in the place he had come to think of as the front of the class. "You have kept the small," Brackenmore said, waking. "The North Dungeons hold. Diles watches them, and you have not gone poking at what you are not ready to mend, which shows more sense than I credited you with. Good, then it is time you saw the thing itself. Open the ear. Open it all the way, wider than you have dared, and reach down past the north seam, past the deep foundations, to the floor beneath the floor. I will hold you. You will not fall. Look at the seal, Harry Potter, and understand what 900 years of us have died to keep." Harry opened the ear all the way. The castle unfolded beneath him the way a chart unfolds, load and thrust and counter-thrust, the whole vast singing logic of it, and he let himself sink through it, down past the dungeons, down past the north seam with its sour numb lace, down into the roots of the mountain where no student had ever walked and no map had ever reached, and Brackenmore held him, a great slow patient hand under his falling attention, and showed him the seal. It lay at the bottom of everything, and it was beautiful, and it was failing, and the two facts together were almost more than the borrowed grandeur of Brackenmore's sight could bear to hold. It was not a wall in the way Harry had pictured a wall. It was a weaving. A vast circular weaving of light and stone and something that was neither, laid down in courses like masonry and yet alive like a heartbeat, and woven through every strand of it Harry saw were the wardens, not their bodies, their portions. He saw the threads that were Brackenmore's, the deep foundation strands, the load-bearing courses of the whole. He saw a bright clean weave of green and silver that he knew, without being told, for Diles, the living mercy of it, the part that kept the seal not merely strong but whole, that healed its own small tears before they widened. He saw 91 signatures woven into one working, 91 lives given strand by strand across 1,000 years, and the working turned slowly in the dark like a wheel of stained glass the size of the Great Hall, and it was the most magnificent thing Harry Potter had ever seen or would ever see, and it had a hole in it. He understood looking why the dead had been laid where they were laid. The beds in the hall above were not a tomb and not a monument, they were the near ends of the strands. Each sleeper lay directly over his own portion of the wheel, moored to it, an anchor stone at the top of a thread that ran down through 900 years of rock to the turning glory at the bottom of the world. And the risen light that Harry had loved from his first night in the hall was the light of the seal itself, carried up the strands, the wheel's slow radiance leaking through the anchor stones the way sun leaks through a shuttered window. The dead were not resting under Hogwarts, they were still working. Every one of them, every hour of every year, was still holding, and the Hall of the Risen Light was not a graveyard at all, but the topside of the greatest single act of magic the island had ever seen, a labor 900 years long and not yet finished, and Harry had been walking its upper gallery for a month and calling it a crypt. The hole was small, that was the horror of it. In all that vast turning glory, the failure was a single frayed place near the northern arc, no bigger than a dinner plate against a cathedral window, and through the frayed place on the far side, in a dark so complete it made the deep rock seem bright, something looked back. Harry felt the hollow see him. It was not a face, and it had no eyes, and it regarded him nonetheless, an attention vast and patient and utterly without heat, the attention of a thing that had waited before the founders and would wait after the last warden, that did not hate him because hatred was a kind of warmth and it had none, that wanted only the one thing a hole can want, which is to be filled and could be filled by everything, and would begin, when the lace gave way, with a school. "Enough," said Brackenmore, and drew him back up through the roots and the dungeons and the singing structure to the risen light of the hall, and Harry came back into his own body with the taste of that patient cold still on the back of his tongue. "Now you have seen it," Brackenmore said. "Now you understand what the number meant, 61, that is the whole of the weaving still sound. 39 parts in 100 have gone thin or gone entirely, and the frayed place you saw is only the first to fail all the way through, and behind it are others thinning, and the wheel turns slower every year because every year there are fewer living strands to drive it. It cannot be patched from above. Dumbledore has tried and buys years, and it is not enough. It can be mended in one way only, and that way is the laying in of a fresh portion, a whole living portion, woven into the wheel by a hand that carries the craft of all the wardens who wove before." A pause, weighty as the mountain. "There has been no such hand in 900 years. There is one now if he is equal to the making of himself. Do you begin to see, Harry, why the door troubled itself to open?" "I see that I need to be more than I am," Harry said, "faster than anyone wants me to be." He turned in the risen light and looked down the long aisle at the sleepers, and stopped, deliberately, at the bed of the narrow man with the raven signet and the everlasting boredom. "And I see that I've got a ministry inspector arriving in 3 days to find out exactly how much more than I am I've become. Which means the next thing I need isn't stone or healing. It's a tongue that can walk into a room full of clever, suspicious people and walk out again having given them nothing and taken everything." He looked at the carved, contemptuous face. "That's him, isn't it? Phineas Nigellus Black, the subtle tongue. That," said Brackenmore, and there was a weight of warning in it, "is the most dangerous man in this hall, and I include the woman with the portcullis and the one they buried with his wand still in his hand. He will teach you to read people the way I taught you to read stone, and it is a craft worth more than any duel, and he will also teach you, if you let him, to hold every living soul you meet in the contempt he held them in, because that is the price stitched into his portion, and he paid it gladly and thought himself wise. Take him if you must, but take Diles with you into the taking, do you hear me? Keep the healer at the front of your mind when you kneel to the manipulator. A warden who can read every heart and warm to none is not a warden. He is a thing the Hollow would be glad to meet halfway." "I hear you," Harry said, and meant it, and walked down the aisle and knelt by the bed of Phineas Nigellus Black and laid his hand on the cold carved stone. "Inherit?" the system asked in its calm gold letters. "Inherit," Harry said. The narrow man came into him like a blade sliding home into a sheath cut to fit it, and where Brackenmore had arrived as sediment and Diles as mercy, Phineas Nigellus Black arrived as an opinion, fully formed, elegant, and withering. Harry felt 3 centuries of a particular kind of attention flood into him, the attention that reads a room the way other men read a page, that clocks the tell in a shoulder and the lie in a courtesy and the fear behind the swagger, that knows before a man has finished his sentence how the sentence will end and how to turn it. He felt the portrait web bloom open around him, all the painted eyes in the castle and beyond it suddenly available, a great gossiping net of oil and canvas through which a subtle mind could move and listen and gather. And he felt the contempt exactly as Brackenmore had warned, the deep aristocratic certainty that people were levers. That sentiment was a weakness other people had, that the wise man used the fools and the fools deserved it. "Oh," said Phineas Nigellus Black in a voice like cold silk drawn across a blade, "the castle has finally produced someone worth talking to. Do sit up straight, boy, you slouch like a Weasley. Legacy inherited. Phnasniglus Black, the subtle tongue. You have received the reading of minds and men, the portrait web, the art of the unspoken. Wardens inherited, 3 of 91. I don't slouch," Harry said. "You slouch morally, which is worse and more interesting. You have just knelt by my grave and taken the finest political instrument this school ever produced into your unwashed adolescent skull because you are afraid of a civil servant, and you did it with a healer whispering in your other ear to be sure you stayed sweet about it. I approve, incidentally, not of the healer, of the fear. Fear is the only honest tutor. Men who tell you they act without fear are either lying or useless, and usually both." The cold silk turned, considering. "Now, you want to survive an inspection, child's work, but you do not merely want to survive it, or you would have stayed a nice boy and filled in your little form and let them find nothing and go home. You want to survive it while learning everything the inspector knows, and everything the inspector's mistress knows, and everything the man in the office at the top of the stairs is keeping from you, and you want to do it without any of the 3 of them being certain you did anything at all. That is not survival. That is a campaign, and a campaign, my slouching young friend, is a thing I can teach." Harry got up off his knees. The Hall of the Dead burned steady around him, 91 suns, 3 of them now speaking in his skull, and he could feel already how the 3 of them fit together and where they ground against each other. The mason and the healer and the manipulator, council convened in the space behind his eyes, and he understood that Brackenmore had told him the truth about the danger and that the danger was worth it, and that keeping both those facts in mind at once was going to be the actual work of the rest of his life. "Teach me the portrait web first," he said. "I want to know what's coming before it arrives." Phineas Nigellus Black laughed, a dry pleased sound, and taught him. It was, Harry thought afterward, the single most useful night of his education, and it was entirely off the curriculum. He learned that every portrait in the castle was a door, that the painted headmasters and headmistresses moved among their own frames and visited one another's, and carried word between the great houses of Wizarding Britain the way owls carried post, only faster and silent and unwatched. He learned to reach through his own connection to the web, to feel the painted eyes as a fisherman feels the weight on his line, to listen at the edges of 100 rooms without leaving the Hall of the Dead. And he learned that very night 3 things worth knowing. He learned from a portrait of a bored duchess who hung in a ministry waiting room and had nothing better to do than eavesdrop, that Cordelia Ashgrove had not slept in her own bed in 9 days, that she worked past midnight every night, and that the word she used most often to her subordinates was not power or dark or threat but responsible, as in, we are the ones who will be held responsible when it happens again, and I do not intend to be responsible for a second time. That single word rearranged a great deal in Harry's understanding of what he was up against. A woman hungry for power he could have fought cleanly. A woman terrified of a repeat of some past horror she had failed to stop, working herself to ruin to be sure she never had to bury those numbers again, was not an enemy. She was a tragedy looking for somewhere to happen, and Harry was standing exactly where she was looking. He learned from a portrait in the Hog's Head that Phineas navigated with the ease of long practice, that the inspector coming to Hogwarts was named Dunstan Ravel, that he had been an unspeakable before he was an inspector, and that he was, in the professional opinion of the room, a stone, a closed man. And a cluemens of the deep sort, trained in the department of mysteries to hold his mind shut against reading, which meant that the legilimency Harry had just inherited would slide off him the way Pomfrey's healing had slid off the Hollow's wound, and that the interview would have to be won some other way. And he learned from the portrait of Phineas Nigellus Black that hung in the very office at the top of the castle, spoken to by his own dead self across the web with an intimacy no living wizard could have managed, that Albus Dumbledore had stood at the window 3 nights running staring at the north dungeons, and had said aloud to a room he believed empty of listeners, "He is moving faster than the seal is failing. Merlin grant that is a mercy and not the beginning of the disaster." Which told Harry that Dumbledore knew about the seal, and knew it was failing, and knew that Harry was racing it, and was afraid in equal measure of Harry losing the race and of Harry winning it. And he learned one thing more, saved for last because Phineas had judged it the one that mattered, gleaned from a portrait of a long-dead minister that hung in the Department of Mysteries, where even unspeakables forgot to guard their tongues before a painting they assumed asleep. Cordelia Ashgrove had filed a requisition. Not for orders, not for a raid, for records, the original founding charter of Hogwarts, the deeds of the land beneath it, the surveys of the deep works that the ministry had commissioned in 3 separate centuries and buried in 3 separate vaults. She was not looking at the 3rd floor. She had never been looking at the 3rd floor. She was reading her way down, patient and thorough and legally immaculate, toward the same floor beneath the floor that Harry had knelt above 2 nights before, and when she had read enough to be certain of what lay there, she would not send an inspector. She would come herself. The portrait had heard her say it to no one in the small hours in the tone of a woman making a promise to the dead. If it is what I think it is, I will go down there myself, and I will see it with my own eyes, and then I will decide what has to be done. You see, said Phineas, pleased with his pupil, a campaign. Now go up and sleep, and in 3 days you will let Mr. Dunstan Ravel believe he has read a nervous schoolboy, and I will be at the front of your mind the entire time, and we will send him home with a report so reassuring that the good Deputy Ashgrove will cross Hogwarts off her list of thick places in the dark for a fortnight, which is all the time a campaign ever needs, a fortnight bought clean again and again until the war is won. The 2 days before Ravel came were the hardest teaching Harry had yet survived, and none of it happened in a classroom. The trouble with the reading of minds and men was that it did not switch off. Brackenmore's ear he had learned to close, Phineas's eyes stayed open whether Harry willed it or not, and everywhere Harry looked he saw the machinery under the faces. He sat down to breakfast and read the whole table in a glance, read Ron's cheerful envy of Harry's easy morning and the small brave lie in it, read Hermione's worry aging her a year a week, read a fourth year 2 seats down composing herself to ask a boy to Hogsmeade and getting the timing wrong, read Lavender's flattery and Dean's boredom and a first year's homesickness worn like a coat 2 sizes big. It was too much. It was a room full of open letters he had not asked to read, and under the flood of it ran Phineas's cool commentary, naming each lever, pricing each weakness, and the commentary was never wrong, and that was the danger, because a thing that is never wrong is very easy to start obeying. He caught himself doing it in potions. Slughorn asked a question, and Harry saw in the half-second before he answered exactly how to phrase the answer to make Slughorn beam and remember him fondly and drop, over the next week, 3 useful pieces of gossip from the Slug Club's better-connected corners. He saw the whole small manipulation laid out clean as a diagram, and he heard Phineas murmur do it, and it would have cost nothing and hurt no one and gained him 3 facts he could genuinely use, and Harry answered the question plainly instead, correctly and without charm, and watched Slughorn's interest slide off him, and felt Phineas's disappointment like a draught under a door. You leave gold on the table, Phineas said that night, out of a squeamishness you mistake for virtue. Every one of those little turnings is free, no one is harmed, you are simply better at the game than they are and you decline to play it and you call the declining goodness, when it is only fear of what you would become if you were honest about your own talents. Maybe, Harry said, brushing his teeth in the dark of the bathroom so the mirror would not report him talking to himself. Or maybe the first free turning is always free and the second one costs a little, and by the 100th you can't tell the difference between a person and a lever anymore, and you end up exactly like you, 300 years dead and still lonely enough to be glad a 16-year-old came to talk to you. He rinsed. Diles says mercy's a skill, I think contempt is too. I think you practiced yours until you were the best in Britain, and I think it made you the best in Britain, and I think you'd give the whole of it back for one person who'd loved you without you managing them into it. So no, I'll leave the gold on the table. I've got other ways to be rich. For a long moment the cold silk said nothing at all. Then grudgingly with an edge Harry had not heard from him before, something almost like an old wound reopening. You are going to be very hard to teach, Phineas Nigellus Black said. And then lower, good, the easy ones die first, go to sleep. Dunstan Ravel arrived on a grey Thursday and set up in an unused office off the Charms corridor and interviewed 40 students over 2 days, and Harry was 17th on his list. He was a narrow grey man with a narrow grey voice, and he did not look up when Harry came in, and this was the first move, the small studied rudeness designed to unsettle, and Harry felt Phineas identify it and dismiss it in the same instant. Ravel finished writing something. He set down his quill. He looked at Harry with eyes the color of dishwater and a mind Harry could feel, shut as tight as a bank vault, no purchase anywhere, a smooth grey wall where another man's thoughts and tells would have been. Sit, Ravel said. Mr. Potter, you'll appreciate I've heard a great deal about you. I try not to let it prejudice me. I find the famous are usually less than their legends and occasionally very much more, and it's the second sort my department exists to notice. He folded his hands. A student was injured on the 3rd floor corridor 11 days ago. Miss Fenwick, the official record says a fall. The hospital matron's report says a great deal of nothing at unusual length, which in my experience is how a careful woman writes when she has seen something she does not wish to describe. You were present. Tell me what you saw. Here it was. Harry felt the whole shape of the trap, laid with real skill, an open question, no accusation, plenty of room to talk, and a closed mind on the other side of it, watching not for the content of the answer but for its architecture, for the seams where a rehearsed story showed its joins. Ravel did not need to read Harry's mind. He needed only to listen to a lie the way Harry now listened to a wall, for the one course set a hair out of true, so Harry did not lie. I saw her on the floor, he said. She was cold, not shivering cold, cold in patches, and the patches moved, which I'd never seen and hope I never see again. I thought she was dying. I think she was dying. Madame Pomfrey came and did everything I've ever seen her do for anyone, and it wasn't working. And I did the only thing I could think of, which was hold on to Nia and tell her she wasn't allowed to die, which is not magic, and I know it's not magic, but I was 13 once and scared on a floor, and I know what it's worth to have someone decide out loud that you're going to live. He let that sit. It was true, every word, and it was arranged, and the arrangement was Phineas's, and the sincerity was his own, and the two together made a thing that a mind reader could not have caught in a lie, because there was no lie in it, only a truth with a great deal left out, told with the whole of Harry's real and considerable feeling for a scarred girl at the Gryffindor table. Ravel watched him for a long moment. Something moved behind the dishwater eyes, and it was not suspicion. It was the small, involuntary softening of a closed man who has been shown a true thing and cannot help but recognize it. Phineas noted the softening with clinical delight. Use it, the cold silk murmured. He has a daughter or a dead sister or a boy he could not save. Everyone has one. Reach for it. Harry did not reach for it. He felt the lever under his hand, and he did not pull it, and he felt Phineas register the refusal with something between contempt and, buried under the contempt, the faintest possible respect, and he kept the healer at the front of his mind exactly as Brackenmore had told him to, and he simply sat and let a grieving inspector look at a truthful boy and win the interview by declining to win it dirty. That's an unusual answer, Ravel said at last. Most of them tell me what they think I want. You told me what happened and hid the rest of it so cleanly I can see the shape of the hiding and can't lay a finger on it. You'd have made an unspeakable, Mr. Potter. It's not a compliment. We're not happy men. He picked up his quill. The deputy will want to know why a dozen students go quiet and careful the moment your name comes up. I'll tell her the truth, which is that this school loves you and closes around you like a fist, and that I found no evidence of any dark practice, and that I'd stake my pension the injury to Miss Fenwick was no fall, and that I can't prove a word of it, and that in my professional judgment whatever is happening here is happening a great deal deeper than the third floor. He looked up. You may go, and Mr. Potter, whatever it is, be careful it doesn't teach you to enjoy this. I've watched clever men learn to enjoy this, and it's the last useful thing they ever learn. Harry went. Ravel's last words followed him down the corridor and would not be shaken loose. Be careful it doesn't teach you to enjoy this. The trouble was that he had enjoyed it, not the deceiving. There had been no deceiving. He had enjoyed the competence, the clean fit of the right tool to the right lock, the sensation of walking into a room owned by a professional and walking out with the professional half persuaded he owed Harry something. It was the same pleasure the stone song gave him, and the healing, the pleasure of a thing done well, and Phineas was purring in the back of his skull that there was nothing wrong with taking joy in one's own excellence, that guilt was a tax the mediocre levied on the gifted, and Harry could not quite find the flaw in the argument and did not trust it precisely because he could not. He climbed toward Gryffindor Tower with 3 centuries of political genius humming its approval in his skull, and a warning from a grey ministry stone sitting in his chest beside the warning from a 900-year-old mason. And he had made it as far as the 7th floor when the gargoyle's stair opened ahead of him, and Albus Dumbledore stepped out into the corridor as if he had been waiting, which Harry understood at once through 3 inherited kinds of attention he had. Walk with me, Dumbledore said. The night is fine, and I think better on the move, and I believe you and I have reached the point in our acquaintance where a certain amount of the truth would do us both good. They walked. The castle breathed around them, and Harry kept the ear half open and felt Dumbledore feel him do it, 2 wardens of a kind pacing a dark corridor, each reading the other and each knowing it. Mr. Ravel filed his report an hour ago, Dumbledore said. He was good enough to let me see it before it went south, as a professional courtesy between men who both disliked the ministry for different reasons. It is a small masterpiece. He found nothing, and he wrote 3 pages explaining, with great precision, the exact shape of the nothing he found, and the shape is you. A dry note came into the old voice. I have interviewed a great many people in my life, Harry, and been interviewed by a few, and I know the particular flavor of a man who has been handled by an expert and cannot decide whether to be grateful or afraid. You gave a former unspeakable that flavor at the age of 16. I confess it did not entirely reassure me. I told him the truth, Harry said. I am quite sure you did. That is what alarms me. A liar I could correct. A boy who has learned to win with the truth is a far more dangerous thing, because the truth does not leave the guilty residue that lets an old man sleep. He walked a few paces. You have taken the black boy's portion. I felt it go. I taught in this castle when his portrait still called the students rabble to their faces, and I know his voice the way you know the sound of a particular door. Tell me he is not running your mouth tonight. He's not, Harry said. He wanted to. I told him no. That's sort of the whole thing I'm trying to explain to you without saying it out loud, sir. I keep telling them no. Something eased minutely in the tall silver shape beside him. I will tell you what I know, Dumbledore said, and I will do it plainly, because I have watched you spend 3 weeks becoming a person to whom plainness is the only remaining courtesy. There is a seal beneath this school. You have seen it. Do not trouble to deny it. I felt you go down to it 2 nights ago the way I would feel a stranger cross my own threshold. It holds a thing the founders could not kill, and it is failing, and it has been failing slowly for 3 centuries and quickly for one, and I have spent 30 years learning to slow the failing and have succeeded only in slowing it. I cannot mend it. The mending requires a craft that died with the last true warden, and I am not a warden, Harry. I am a very good caretaker who happens to hold the office. There is a difference, and the seal knows the difference even when the wizarding world does not. He walked in silence a moment. You are becoming the thing I am not. That is the whole of the matter, and it is why I have not stopped you, and why I lie awake wondering whether I should. What happens to a warden who mends the seal? Harry asked. He had been building to the question for a week, and he asked it now flatly in the dark, because Ravel had just taught him the value of the plain true question, and Phineas had taught him to watch the answer rather than hear it. The laying in, the fresh portion, Brackenmore won't tell me the cost. Diley started to and stopped. You're going to tell me because you've been circling it since the first morning, and because you think if you don't tell me I'll find out the hard way, and you're right. Dumbledore stopped walking. In the torchlight the age of him was very plain, and the sorrow, and something underneath the sorrow that Harry, with Phineas at the front of his mind, read without wanting to. They die, Dumbledore said, every one of them. The laying in of a living portion is precisely that, a life woven whole into the wheel, given entire. The wardens in that hall did not lie down when they were old and tired, Harry. They lay down when the seal called for a strand, and there was no other strand to give, and they gave the only thing that would serve, which was all of it. 91 of them. 91 lives spent one at a time across 1,000 years, each buying a century of holding, and the portraits upstairs will tell you it was an honor, and they believed it, and it was true, and it was also a slaughter that the wisest men of every age agreed to call something else. He looked at Harry with the whole weight of 30 years in his face. The seal will call for a strand within the year. I have known this since the summer. I am not a warden and cannot answer the call in the old way, and so I have been preparing to answer it in the only way left to a caretaker, which is to give my life to buy the time for a real warden to be found or made. I had thought I had years to find him. Then the door opened for a 16-year-old, and I find I am no longer certain which of us it means to spend. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere below them the north dungeons held, watched by a healer 3 centuries dead. Above them 91 portraits slept in their frames, each an original lying in the deep, each having lain down when the wheel called and given the whole of a life. It isn't going to be you, Harry said, and it isn't going to be me, because there's a third answer and nobody's found it in 1,000 years because nobody's ever had all of them in one place before alive at the same time. I have 3, I'm going to have more. And when I have enough of them thinking in here at once, one of them or all of them together is going to know a way to feed that wheel that doesn't end with a grave. That's what the door opened for, not to pick which of us dies, to make someone who doesn't have to. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. In the depths of him something that had been braced for 30 years shifted, very slightly, toward a thing it had not dared to hold since before Harry was born, and Harry, reading it, had the grace not to name the thing even to himself. That, Dumbledore said softly, is either the most arrogant thing a student has ever said to me, or the first genuinely new idea anyone has had about the seal in 900 years. I have lived long enough to know they are frequently the same sentence. He had to walk again, back toward the gargoyle, and Harry fell in beside him. Go slowly, Harry, I will say it as often as you need to hear it, but a pause, and in the pause something that was almost, not quite, a blessing. Do not go so slowly that the wheel calls before your third answer is ready. Good night. The gargoyle swallowed him, and the stair spiraled up, and Harry stood alone in the 7th-floor corridor with 3 dead wardens in his skull and a 4th answer forming in the dark behind his eyes. Well, said Phineas Nigellus Black into the quiet, with the cold silk turned for once to something that might, in a poor light, have been approval. You lied to me, boy. You told me you wanted to survive an inspection. You want to rewrite the oldest law in this castle. I withdraw my earlier estimate. You do not slouch morally at all. You merely stoop, the better to lift something the rest of us were too small to carry. Now go to bed. We have a great many graves to open, and you will want your strength. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The watcher in the walls, the ministry stopped asking and started watching on the first Monday of November. The decree arrived pinned to the great notice board in the entrance hall, and by breakfast every student in the castle had walked past it, and every student in the castle had understood, in the wordless way a school understands a change in the weather, that the rules had shifted under their feet. Educational Security Measure the 4th, it said, in the same clipped official typeface as the questionnaire that had preceded it. For the protection of pupils and the preservation of order, the Office of Educational Security has installed within this institution a system of passive magical observation. The system records only anomalous concentrations of magic exceeding sanctioned instructional levels. It reads no minds, opens no letters, and observes no private conduct. It exists solely to ensure that nothing is practiced within these walls that the lawful authorities of magical Britain have not been given the opportunity to know about. By order of the Deputy for Educational Security, Cordelia Ashgrove, Harry read it with two kinds of attention at once, and the two kinds disagreed. Phineas read the politics of it and found them elegant. It reads no minds, opens no letters. A masterpiece of reassurance, the cold silk observed admiringly. She gives up the two intrusions everyone fears and keeps the only one that matters. No parent can object, no governor can vote against it. And she has hung a net across the whole castle that will chime the instant anyone does anything genuinely powerful, which, my boy, is a category that now consists almost entirely of you. Brackenmore read the working itself through Harry's ward sense and found it crude and effective, which was worse than either alone. There were stones. Harry could feel them the moment he went looking, small enchanted nodes set into the walls at intervals through the school, in the corridors, in the classrooms, in the stairwells, a lattice of listening laid over the castle's own ancient nervous system like a net thrown over a sleeping animal. They did not read thought, they read magnitude. Every spell cast within the school plucked at the nearest node the way a fly plucks a web, and the nodes reported the size of the pluck. And somewhere in a ministry office a quill was drawing a map of where, in Hogwarts, large magic happened. A wall settling true in the small hours would pluck the web. A wound closed with borrowed healing would pluck it hard. And a warden going down through the roots of the castle to kneel at the graves of the dead would, Harry understood with a coldness that steadied rather than frightened him, ring the whole net like a struck gong. The school took the net badly, in the particular way a school takes a thing it cannot fight. There was no rebellion. There was worse than rebellion. There was adjustment. Harry watched it happen over the first 3 days, watched 400 children learn without being taught to cast a little smaller, to duel a little softer, to think twice in the half-second before a big spell about whether the big spell was worth a chime and a note and a name on a list in London. The duel club met on Wednesday and was a shadow of itself, everyone pulling their wand work, nobody willing to be the anomaly, the glass reported. A second year cried in the library because she could not make her lumos bright enough for the essay and was afraid a bright one would get her father in trouble. The castle, which had spent 1,000 years teaching the young that magic was a birthright to be reveled in, learned in 72 hours to teach them that magic was a risk to be managed, and Harry, who could feel the change running through the walls like a chill, understood that this was the true cost of Ashgrove's elegant, mind-reading, letter-respecting net. It did not need to catch anyone, it only needed to be there, and the children taught themselves the rest. "It's clever," Hermione said on the second evening, in the tone she reserved for clever things she despised. She had read the decree 4 times and found no clause to attack which offended her more than any illegality would have. "That's what I can't stand about it. It's all perfectly legal and perfectly reasonable, and it makes everyone smaller, and there's nothing to push against, because the moment you push you've proved you're the sort of person who pushes, and that's the whole thing they're measuring." She looked at Harry across the common room table, and her eyes were tired and sharp. "You've gone quiet in class, have you noticed? You used to be the one showing off the good wand work. Now you sit at the back doing the minimum and getting it exactly right, which from anyone else I'd call lazy, and from you I call hiding." "What are you hiding, Harry?" "The same thing everyone's hiding," Harry said, which was true and was not the truth and had become his native language. "That I can do more than they want me to." She held his eyes a moment longer than the answer deserved. "One day," she said, "you're going to tell me the whole of it, and I'm going to be furious that you waited, and then I'm going to help you, because that's the order those 3 things always come in with us. I just want it on the record that I offered before it got bad." She went back to her essay. Ron, who had listened to all of it without looking up from his chess, moved a knight and said to the board, "She's right, mate, you've gone weird, good weird mostly, but weird." And Harry looked at the two of them, the whole of his ordinary life, sitting in a common room learning to be smaller under a ministry net, and felt the full weight of what he was carrying alone, and carried it alone, because the alternative was to hand them a share of a danger that had already put a scar on a 13-year-old's ribs. He had walked down to the rest 4 times in the past month. He could not walk down a 5th without the ministry knowing the exact spot where a 16-year-old vanished off the map into a place the map declined to show. He needed to see the net before it saw him. He needed to see everything. There was a man in the Hall of the Dead who had spent his death seeing. Harry waited 2 days. He spent them casting nothing above a first-year's charm, moving through the monitored corridors like an ordinary student, learning the net's rhythm as he had once learned Filch's roots, and by the second evening he had its schedule mapped in his head. The nodes reported not continuously but in pulses, a sweep of the whole lattice every 90 seconds, and between the sweeps there was a window, narrow and regular, in which the net was deaf. 90 seconds of listening, perhaps 4 of silence. It was not much, it would have to be enough, because the 5th descent could not wait, and because Harry had begun to suspect that the thing he most needed from the dead was the thing that would let him stop guessing at windows and start seeing them. He timed the descent to the silence, slipped through the blank arch in the 4-second deaf spot, and was down the worn stair and into the risen light before the net swept again and found the corridor empty and reported truthfully that nothing of consequence had happened there at all. "Neat," said a voice he had not heard before, dry and clipped and watchful from somewhere down the aisle. "You counted the sweeps, most would have run for it and rung the bell. You waited and learned the gap. That is the beginning of the only craft that ever kept a castle safe, which is not the sword and not the wall but the eye that sees the blow before it falls." Harry walked toward the voice. It came from a bed he had passed a dozen times without pausing, a spare stone figure with its carved head turned, alert, toward the door of the hall, one hand raised to shade carved eyes against a light that had stopped shining 900 years ago. The system surfaced its gold line as Harry approached. EVERARD. "The Watcher, Legacy, Farsight, SCRYNG, the eyes of the castle. You know why you have come," Everard said. He did not waste words. Harry could feel the economy of him, a man who had spent a life learning that the length of a warning was the enemy of its usefulness. "You are half blind and you have noticed it at last. You feel the stone, you read the flesh, you weigh the man in front of you, and all of it is close work, all of it within arm's reach, and the danger to this school has never once in its history come from within arm's reach. It comes from the deep, which you cannot see, and from the ministry, which you cannot see, and it is coming faster than you can feel your way toward with your hands. You need to see far, that is what I kept. Kneel." Harry knelt and laid his hand on the cold stone, and the system asked, and Harry answered, and Everard came into him like a window thrown open in a shuttered house. The sight arrived the way the stone song had arrived, as a flood, but where Brackenmoor's flood had gone down into the roots, Everard's went out and out and out. Harry felt his awareness leave the confines of his skull and rise, and the castle opened beneath it like a diagram drawn in light. He saw Hogwarts entire, not with his eyes, which were shut, but with a sense that had no name in any language he knew. The whole vast pile of it laid out at once, every tower and stair and hidden room, the sleeping students in their houses, the ghosts drifting the corridors, the ministry's net of nodes glowing sullen and orange across the walls, and beyond the walls the grounds, the black lake with its cold slow currents and its watchful depths, the forbidden forest breathing its old green dark. The mountains standing guard and running under all of it, invisible to any ordinary sight, the ley lines. He had not known the ley lines were there. No one had told him. Everard had known, and now Harry knew, and the knowing rearranged the world. They were rivers of magic sunk in the earth, older than the castle, older than the hollow, great slow arteries of power that met and crossed in the deep beneath the school in a knot so dense and so ancient that Harry understood at last why the founders had built here and nowhere else. They had not built a school on a pretty hill. They had built a lid on the single place in all of Britain where the earth's own magic ran thickest, because it was the one place where a thing like the hollow, if it woke and fed, could drink deep enough to end the world, and the one place with power enough to hold it if it were bound. The Farsight held the whole of it before him at once, and it was almost too much to bear, and Everard would not let him look away. He saw the ley lines burn gold and green and a deep arterial red in the dark of the earth, 7 of them, converging beneath the school from 7 directions across the island, from a stone circle in the west and a drowned valley in the north and a chalk hill in the south whose names Everard knew and Harry did not, all of them running inward, all of them pouring their slow, immense power into the knot beneath Hogwarts, and around the knot, drinking it, feeding on it. Held back from it by the turning wheel of the seal, the hollow. It was the architecture of the world laid bare, the true shape of the thing the founders had done, and Harry understood standing in it why no single warden could mend the seal and live, because the seal was not fed by a wizard's magic at all. It was fed by the ley lines, and a warden who wove himself into it did not lend it his power. He lent it his life, made himself a living valve through which the earth's own magic could pour, and the pouring used him up, the way a wick is used up by the flame it carries. To be the seal's strand was to be its fuel. That was the cost Diles had started to name and stop. That was what 91 had paid. Legacy inherited. EVERARD, the Watcher, you have received Farsight. The SCRYING of distance, the eyes of the castle. Wardens inherited, 4 of 91. Now look down, said Everard, and see with a clear eye what you saw before through a mason's love. See the seal as a watchman sees it, not as a glory, as a position to be defended. Harry looked down, and the Farsight showed him the seal, and it was the same vast turning wheel he had wept over through Brackenmoor's grief-struck eyes, and it was also, seen cold, a fortress with a breach in its wall. Everard did not marvel at the weaving. Everard counted it. Harry felt the man's ancient attention move over the wheel the way a general moves over a map, marking the sound sections and the thin ones, ranking the failures by nearness and by speed, and where Brackenmoor had shown him one frayed place and grieved, Everard showed him 7 and did not grieve and told him which would go first, the northern arc. The frayed place under the north dungeons, the one whose cold had already reached up and bitten a child. Everard's sight measured it against the 6 others and returned a verdict as flat and certain as a butcher's scale. This one and soon, and not in the slow way the others would fail across years, but suddenly a full breach because the lace there was not merely thin but under strain, load bearing down on a section that could no longer bear it, and load, Everard observed, does not thin gradually. Load holds and holds and holds, and then it does not hold at all. When, Harry said. Days, said Everard. A fortnight at the most, and only that long if nothing disturbs it. If something disturbs it, a great magic worked nearby, a shock to the deep stone, a fool going down to look with too heavy a tread, it goes sooner. It goes the moment it is touched wrong. The watchful voice sharpened. And there is a woman with an auror's training reading her way toward this very floor, meaning to come down and look with her own eyes. She does not know that looking done wrong is the same as breaking. No one has told her, because no one who could tell her knows she is coming. You know she is coming. That is the whole of the advantage you have, and it is a real one, and you had better spend it well. Harry came back up into his own body in the risen light. 4 wardens now convened behind his eyes, and sat for a moment on his heels among the graves of the men and women who had spent their deaths holding the lid on the end of the world, and did the arithmetic, and did not like it, and did it anyway because that was the job. Days, a fortnight at most. A ministry deputy reading toward the deep, who would, if she found the door, go down and look, and by looking break the very thing she had come to secure. A net of listening nodes across the castle that would chime if Harry worked the great magic the mending would require. And a mason, a healer, a manipulator, and a watchman in his skull. 4 crafts of 91, 4 strands of a wheel that needed a 92nd strand woven whole and living into its northern arc before the load came down. He was not ready. He knew he was not ready. He was going to have to become ready in a fortnight, under the eye of a ministry that would arrest him for the attempt, and the alternative was to let the north dungeons fall and the hollow put its patient cold mouth to the breach and begin, as it had always meant to begin, with a school full of sleeping children. Then I'd better see her coming, Harry said out loud to the 4 of them, before she sees me. And he timed the climb back up to the 90-second silence, and went to war with the eyes of the castle wide open. The advantage of far sight, he discovered over the days that followed, was that a boy who could see the whole school at once was very difficult to surprise, and the disadvantage was that a boy who could see the whole school at once could not stop seeing it. Everard rode at the top of his mind like a lookout in a crow's nest, and through the lookout Harry watched the ministry's net pulse and sweep, watched the sullen orange nodes, and watched on the 3rd day a new thing arrive, a person. Her name was Junior Liaison Officer Pym, and she was perhaps 2 years out of Hogwarts herself, earnest and overworked and armed with a clipboard, and a set of instructions she plainly found more comfortable than the school she had been sent to apply them to. She was installed in a cramped office next to Filch's, and her job, Harry gathered through the portrait web within an hour of her arrival, was to sit beside the net's reporting glass and note down every anomaly it chimed and forward the notes to London nightly. She was not the enemy. She was the enemy's ear pressed to the wall, and she was young and frightened of doing her new job badly, which Phineas identified at once as the most useful fact in the castle. She wants to be told she is doing well, the cold silk murmured. She has been sent alone into the one school in Britain that most resents her office, given a glass that chimes at her all day, and told that the fate of children rests on her accuracy. She is drowning in it. A kind word from a famous boy would be worth more to her than a bribe, and cost you nothing, and buy you a friend beside the very glass that hunts you. You know what to do. Harry knew what Phineas wanted him to do, which was to befriend a lonely girl in order to blind the instrument she guarded, and he did not do it, and he felt Phineas's exasperation like weather. Instead, he did the harder, slower, cleaner thing. He studied the net until he understood it as thoroughly as Brackenmore understood a wall, and he learned, with the 4 of them advising, that the nodes could not tell the difference between a large spell and a large number of small ones, that they reported magnitude and not kind, and that the deep architecture of the castle itself put out a constant low hum of old magic that the net had been calibrated to ignore as background. So Harry taught himself to hide in the background. It was the most delicate work he had yet attempted, and it was pure sharp craft, no grandeur in it at all, only patience and arithmetic. When he needed to work a magic the net would notice, he learned to work it slowly in pieces, each piece small enough to read as ordinary instruction, spread across minutes, so that no single pluck of the web ever rose above the threshold. And when he needed to descend to the rest, he learned to descend inside the castle's own hum, to open the door not with a surge but with the softest possible touch, to move through the deep places wrapped in the background magic of the ley lines so that his passage read, to the net, as one more ripple in the old constant song the nodes had been told to ignore. He became, to the ministry's listening web, a part of the building. Junior Liaison Officer Pym's glass chimed for a dozen ordinary things a day, a lost temper in a dual club, an overeager 6th year in charms, and never once in all the days that followed for the 6th year who was quietly becoming the most concentrated magical event in the history of the school. And on the 4th night, because a watchman who only defends is a watchman already losing, Harry went looking for the enemy. Everard's farsight had a limit. It faded past the grounds, thinned across distance, and could not reach London. But Phineas's portrait web had no such limit, and between the two of them, the sight to know what he was looking at and the web to look through, Harry found a way to put an eye on Cordelia Ashgrove herself. There was a portrait in the outer office of the Deputy for Educational Security, a dim oil of some forgotten undersecretary, and it hung where it could see her desk, and Phineas walked Harry into it in the small hours as easily as a man steps through a familiar door. She was still working, of course she was. Harry watched her through the undersecretary's painted eyes, a woman past 50 with iron-gray hair scraped back without vanity, and a face that had been handsome before it had been ground down into something harder and more useful. And she sat under a single lamp with the deed to the deep works open before her and made notes in a cramped, precise hand, and she did not look like a villain, and she did not look like a fool. She looked like a woman doing a terrible job well because she did not trust anyone else to do it at all. On the wall behind her, where a person keeps the thing they need to see when the work gets hard, there was no portrait of a family and no commendation from the ministry. There was a list. 19 names in a plain black frame and a date and nothing else, and Harry did not need Phineas to tell him what the 19 names were, or why a woman would hang her own worst failure where it would watch her every hour of every day. She spoke once to the empty office in the flat tone of a woman who had long since stopped expecting anyone to answer. There's a lower foundation, she said, to the deed, to the list, to the 19. A whole works beneath the works. 3 surveys and every one of them redacted at the same depth by 3 different ministers. You don't redact a cellar. She set down her quill. Somebody's been keeping something under that school for 1,000 years and nobody's dead of it yet, which either means it's safe or it means it's been lucky, and I have buried 19 people who thought a thing was safe when it had only been lucky. She looked up at the list, and Harry, watching, understood that he was seeing the exact machinery that made her dangerous. The grief turned to duty turned to an iron refusal to be talked down. So I'll go and look, and if it's safe I'll apologize to Albus and go home, and if it's lucky I'll end its luck before it ends anyone else's. Harry withdrew from the portrait and lay a long time in the dark of the tower and did not sleep, and turned the problem of Cordelia Ashgrove over and over, and found no clean edge on it anywhere, because a woman who was right for the right reasons and wrong about only one fact, the single fact that looking would break the very thing she came to secure, was the hardest kind of opponent there was, the kind you could not beat without first keeping safe. Dumbledore found him on the 5th night of it, sitting in a window embrasure on the 7th floor at an hour when no student should have been awake, staring at nothing with the farsight thrown wide. You are watching her, Dumbledore said. He did not ask how Harry was awake or why or what he watched. He had stopped some conversations ago, pretending not to know. Miss Pym and her glass and the net behind it. I have been watching them too, in my duller way. It is a strange thing, is it not, to be hunted by people who believe, correctly, that there is something here worth hunting, and who would, if they caught it, destroy the very thing they mean to keep safe. He lowered himself onto the cold stone of the embrasure across from Harry, an old man folding himself into a student's perch, and for a moment neither of them spoke, and the castle breathed around them. You've seen the seal properly now, Harry said. Haven't you, not tended it from above, seen it? Once, Dumbledore said, 30 years ago when I first took the office and my predecessor took me down to show me what I had truly agreed to keep. I saw it as a man sees a thing he cannot mend, which is to say I saw it and turned away and have spent 30 years arranging not to have to look at it again, and tending its outer courses and telling myself that buying years was the same as doing something. You have seen it as a man sees a thing he might mend. I had forgotten there was a difference. I had made myself forget because the difference is unbearable to a man who is on the wrong side of it. He looked at Harry with the whole weariness of 30 years. The northern arc is going to fail. Days, Harry said. A fortnight at most, sooner if it's disturbed. Yes, Dumbledore was quiet a moment, and the deputy is coming to disturb it. I have had the same intelligence you have, by slower means. She has requisitioned the deed to the deep works. When she has read it, she will know there is a lower foundation, and she will come to inspect it, as is, I am obliged to admit, entirely within her lawful power. And she will bring wards and measures and a company of the well-meaning, and they will go down into the roots of this school treading like a herd of erumpents, and the northern arc will feel the shock of it and let go, and the thing beneath will come up through the breach into a school full of children while the ministry stands in the deep with its recording glasses, having caused the exact catastrophe it exists to prevent. The old voice was very level. I have known Cordelia Ashgrove for 20 years, Harry. She is not a fool and she is not a villain. She's the most dangerous kind of good person, the kind who has been right once when everyone else was wrong and has never recovered from it. She stood in a ministry corridor 11 years ago and told her superiors that a certain quiet accumulation of dark magic in a certain quiet place would end in slaughter, and they did not listen, and it ended in slaughter, and she buried 19 people she might have saved. She will not be talked out of caution again. She will not be talked out of anything by anyone, and she is coming down my stairs. Then we don't talk her out of it, Harry said. We make sure that when she comes down, there's nothing left to break. We mend the ark first, before she gets here. You are not ready to mend the ark. No, Harry agreed, but I'm ready to hold it, and holding it might be enough to buy the time to get ready. I've got a mason who built the load paths, and a watcher who can see exactly where they're failing, and a healer who taught me to draw a line and tell a wound where its edge is. Between the three of them, I think I can go down to the northern ark and shore it. Not mend it, shore it. Take the load off the frayed place and root it round the way you'd prop a failing beam, so it stops being under strain and starts just being thin. Thin holds for years, strained holds for days. If I can turn one into the other, we get our fortnight back and maybe our year, and I get the time to learn the mending properly instead of trying it half-blind with a ministry deputy breathing down the stairwell. He looked at Dumbledore. I need you to keep her in London, by whatever means you've got. Every day you keep her away is a day I get to make myself into the thing that ends this. Can you do that? Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and in the old face something shifted that Harry, with Phineas at the front of his mind, chose not to read too closely, because some things a man is owed the privacy of even from a friend. I can buy you days, Dumbledore said at last, not a fortnight, days. She's coming, Harry, and no power of mine can stop her coming, only slow her, and every day I slow her costs me a piece of the trust that is the only thing keeping this school open under a ministry that would dearly love an excuse to take it. Spend the days well. Go and shore your ark. He rose, an old man in the dark, and paused at the mouth of the corridor. And Harry, when you go down to the northern ark, do not go alone and do not go proud. The last 4 wardens who tried to shore that seal with less than the whole of the craft it required are lying in the hall beneath your feet, and every one of them was cleverer than you and older than you and more ready than you, and the seal took them anyway, because the seal does not grade on effort. He was gone into the dark. Good night. Harry went down to the northern ark the next night, and the seal very nearly took him too. He had planned it as carefully as he planned anything, timed to the net's silence, wrapped in the background hum, descending through the roots with a tread lighter than a falling leaf. He had Everard's sight to guide him to the exact frayed place, and Brackenmore's knowledge of the load paths to plan the rerouting, and Dilys's healer's touch to close the small tears as he worked. He came to the northern ark in the deep dark under the dungeons, where the ley lines crossed and the great wheel turned, and he found the frayed place, and it was worse than the sight had shown from above. A whole section of the weaving gone to gossamer with the full weight of the northern load bearing down on it, and on the far side of the gossamer the patient cold attention of the hollow, waiting, as it had waited before the founders, for the load to finish what 3 centuries of thinning had begun. Harry began to sing the load away. It was Brackenmore's craft, and Brackenmore sang it with him, the deep stone song, coaxing the great courses of the foundation to shift their burden, to take the weight off the frayed ark and carry it round through the sounder sections, the way a company of men will quietly take the load from a comrade whose arms have begun to shake. And the stone answered, as stone always answered Harry now, and the weight began to move, and the frayed place began, for the first time in 100 years, to slacken. And the hollow felt the change and pushed. It was not an attack. Everard had told him true. The hollow did not attack, because attack is a kind of wanting to harm, and it wanted nothing but to fill. It simply pressed as water presses on a weakening dam, all its patient, weightless enormity leaning on the gossamer the instant the gossamer slackened, and where the load Harry had lifted came off the ark, the hollow's pressure came on, and the frayed place, relieved of the honest weight of stone, took up the dishonest weight of the abyss and began to tear. The cold of it reached him then in a way the far sight had spared him from above. This close, with the gossamer tearing and the abyss leaning through, the hollow was not an idea but a temperature, a wrongness that came off the widening rent in slow waves and found the marrow of him and settled there, and it was not like winter, because winter is a thing the body knows how to fear. This was the cold of subtraction. Where it touched the edges of his attention, his own thoughts thinned, went quiet, forgot for half a heartbeat what they had been about, and he felt with perfect clarity how a mind could stand at this breach and simply be erased, gently, without pain, the way a name is erased from a slate, and how the erasing would feel from the inside like peace. For one endless moment Harry stood in the deep with the whole cold nothing of the thing beneath the world leaning on a curtain of light no thicker than breath, and he understood with the flat clarity that had kept him alive through worse, that he had made it worse, that lifting the load had opened the door he meant to prop, that Dumbledore had been exactly right and he had been exactly proud, and that in about 4 seconds the northern ark was going to fail 9 days early with him standing in front of it. Then Dilys spoke fast, no time for reverence. Do not fight the tear. You cannot outpush a thing with no bottom. Close it. Draw the line, boy, the same as the child, the same as her ribs. You cannot fill a hole and you are not trying to. Tell the weaving where its edge is. Now, and Brackenmore under her, I will hold the load off it. You have 3 seconds where it bears nothing. Use them. And Everard over both. The tear runs from the 9th strand to the 14th. Start at the 9th. Go. Harry drew the line. He did what he had done to Nia Fenwick's cold splintered ribs, only vast, only at the scale of a wheel the size of the great hall, and instead of fighting the hollow's pressure he ignored it, turned his whole borrowed craft to the living edge of the weaving where it was still sound, and told it, with everything 4 wardens could pour through a 16-year-old, where it ended. This is the edge of you, hold here, heel inward, let the frayed place go and close behind it. He ran the healer's summons up the tier from the 9th strand to the 14th exactly as Everard had marked it, and the weaving heard him, because the weaving was made of wardens and he was a warden, and the thing he asked was the thing they had died to do. And the sound strands took up the load Brackenmore lifted and drew it round and closed over the gossamer like a wound weeping shut, sealing the frayed place away, walling the hollow's patient cold back behind a curtain that was thin now but whole. And thin and whole holds for years where strained and fraying holds for days. The pressure eased. The hollow, finding the gap closed, did not rage because it could not rage. It simply settled back into its waiting, patient as the grave, and the great wheel turned on in the dark, one frayed place shored, its verdict revised from days to years. And in the instant before the cold withdrew entirely, Harry felt it do a thing that no one had warned him of and that he would not speak of to anyone for a long time. It noticed him. Not the way the net noticed, or Dumbledore, or Ashgrove. It marked him the way the first frost marks the one warm thing left in a field, with a patience that had all the time in the world, and it stored the shape of him against a later hunger, and then it was gone, back into its waiting, and Harry was alone in the deep with 4 dead wardens and a wheel that turned. Harry came up out of the deep on his hands and knees and was sick, quietly, in the dark of the roots, because shoring a curtain against the end of the world with 4 dead people's borrowed hands turned out to cost the living body something the borrowing could not pay. Then he got up because a warden who has just talked the hollow back into its waiting does not get to lie in the dark being sick while a ministry deputy reads her way south, and he wiped his mouth, and he timed the climb to the net's silence, and he went up through the sleeping castle with his own 2 ordinary legs shaking under him and 4 wardens holding their silence in his skull, letting him have the walk to himself. They broke the silence only once near the top, and it was Everard who broke it, dry and clipped, and for the first time not entirely without warmth. "You lifted the load before you had a place to put it," the watchman said. "That was the mistake, and it nearly ended you, and you will not make it again, because a watchman who survives his first ambush is worth 10 who were never ambushed." And Brackenmore under him, slow as the mountain. You went proud, as Dumbledore warned you, and the seal very nearly took you for it, and then you went humble in the space of a single breath and asked 3 of us for help and did exactly as we said, and that Harry Potter is the thing no warden in 900 years managed to learn until it was too late to matter. Pride to get you to the breach, humility to get you home, keep them in that order. And Diley's gentlest of the 3, and be sick when you need to be sick and never once be ashamed of it. The body pays what the borrowing cannot. A warden who forgets he has a body is a warden the hollow already half owns. Harry took the counsel of the dead the way he was learning to take everything now, without argument and without surrender, and climbed the last of the stair. At the top of the roots at the blank arch he stopped, and opened the farsight one last time. At the top of the roots at the blank arch he stopped, and opened the farsight one last time, and looked down at the northern arc from above, and saw it thin and whole and holding, its verdict changed, its fortnight bought, and a great deal more besides. And he looked past it at the 6 other frayed places Everard had counted, thinning slowly across the wheel, and at the great knot of ley lines burning in the deep, and at the sullen orange net of the ministry laid over the sleeping school, and at the small lit window where Junior Liaison Officer Pym sat awake beside a glass that had not chimed once all night. And somewhere far to the south, at the edge of even Everard's sight, in a ministry office where the lamps burned past midnight, a woman with an auror's training turned the last page of a very old deed, and went still, and reached for a fresh sheet of parchment, and began to write the order that would bring her north. Harry closed the arch behind him. The wall leaned into his hand, thin and whole and holding and glad of him, and he leaned back and went up to bed and slept at last the whole night through, which he had not done since the term began, and did not dream, and woke to a castle that was, for one more bought morning, standing. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The Iron Matron and the locked doors. The days Dumbledore bought ran out on a Tuesday. Harry knew before the owl came, because he had been watching the whole board through Everard's sight and Phineas's web for a week, and he had seen the pieces move. He had watched Dumbledore delay the Board of Governors with a masterclass in procedural courtesy, requesting clarifications, noting jurisdictional questions, proposing committees, each maneuver worth 2 or 3 days, each maneuver spending a little more of the goodwill that was the only thing keeping the ministry's hand off the school. He had watched Cordelia Ashgrove absorb each delay without heat and answer it without hurry, a woman who had learned in 11 years of grief that patience was a weapon and impatience a gift you gave your enemy. And on the Tuesday morning Harry watched, through the undersecretary's portrait in her outer office, as she signed the instrument that ended the game. A ministry order of inspection, countersigned by the Chief Warlock's office, granting the Deputy for Educational Security lawful access to inspect any and all structures beneath the Hogwarts Foundation, resistance to which would constitute obstruction of a lawful inquiry, punishable under the statute. She was coming on Friday. She had given 3 days' notice, which she was not obliged to give, and Harry understood the notice for what it was, not a courtesy but a challenge. She wanted whatever was down there to know she was coming. She wanted to see what it did with the warning. The school found out the way schools always found out, sideways and instantly, a rumor traveling the corridors faster than any owl. By lunch it had hardened into fact. The deputy herself was coming in person with orders to inspect the dungeons. The younger students were thrilled by it in the way the young are thrilled by any disruption to the ordinary. The older ones who remembered the war were not. "My dad says Ashgrove's the real thing," Ron said low over a lunch none of them were eating. "Not like Umbridge. He says she's the one they send when they've stopped playing. He says she caught 3 of the ones who went underground after the war when nobody else could find them, and she did it by reading, not raids, paperwork. Just sitting in an office reading until she knew where they had to be." He pushed his potatoes around. He didn't say it like it was a good thing. He said it like you'd talk about a hard winter. "She's coming for the cellars," Hermione said, "which is strange, isn't it, when you think about it? There's a war's worth of dark magic she could be chasing above ground, and she's spending a personal visit and a company of Aurors on the foundations of a school. That's not a woman following a lead. That's a woman following a certainty." She looked, without quite meaning to, at Harry. "You've gone gray, you know, this week. You look like someone who already knows how a story ends and can't tell anyone." She held his eyes. "Is it the cellars, Harry? Is that where you've been going?" "I've been sleeping badly," Harry said, which had stopped being even partly true and which she had stopped even partly believing, and the lie sat between them on the table like a fourth person nobody wanted to introduce. Ron looked from one of them to the other and had the sense, for once, to say nothing. And Harry ate 3 bites he did not taste and excused himself, and climbed the marble stair toward the one room in the castle where he no longer had to lie. 3 days, Dumbledore said, when Harry came to the office without being summoned, which they had both stopped pretending was unusual. The old man looked as if he had not slept, and the portraits on the walls were all awake, 91 painted headmasters watching the living one, with the particular stillness of the dead, who know a reckoning when they see one arriving. "I have spent every hour and every favor I possess, Harry, and I have bought you 3 days, and there are no more days to buy. On Friday she comes down my stairs with a lawful order and a company of trained witches and wizards, and she goes into the deep, and she looks at the seal, and the seal feels the tread of a dozen strangers where no stranger has walked in 300 years, and the northern arc you shored so cleverly holds because you shored it well and one of the other 6 does not." He folded his hands. "You have seen them, the other 6, you know they are thinning. You know what a shock to the deep stone does to a thinning strand. It goes the moment it's touched wrong," Harry said. Everard's exact words and Everard's exact cadence, and Dumbledore heard the borrowing and inclined his head to it. "Then we have 3 days, Dumbledore said, to make certain that when she touches it, it does not go. Which means I'm very much afraid that you must become more than you are, faster than is wise again, and this time without the luxury of a slow descent. Whatever is left in that hall that you need, Harry, you must take it now, all of it. And you must survive the taking, and you must remain yourself, and you must do it in 3 days, and I cannot help you with any part of it, because I am not a warden, and the deep will not open the whole of itself to a caretaker." He looked at Harry with the whole weight of 30 years and something new underneath it, something that had been a plan and was becoming a grief. "Go down tonight, take what you need. And then come back, because there is a thing I must tell you before Friday that I have been a coward about telling you, and I will not be a coward about it any longer." Harry went down that night, and he did not go for 1 grave, he went for 2. He had learned, over 5 descents, the geography of the Hall of the Dead, and he had marked in Everard's cataloguing site the 2 beds he needed now above all the others. He needed to know how the seal was made, the mechanism of it, the locks and the keys and the protocols, the whole institutional machinery that 91 wardens had built up around the raw fact of the wheel, and that knowledge lay in the bed of a weary man who had spent his headship keeping the lids on things. And he needed to know how to hold a wall against an army, because an army was coming down the stairs on Friday whether he willed it or not, and holding walls was the whole of what a woman with a stone portcullis on her tomb had died knowing. He came first to the bed of Armando Dippet. He knew the face, there was a portrait of it upstairs, and the carved version was younger and less tired than the painting. A man with a narrow, cautious face in the hands of a clerk, folded not over a weapon or a bundle of herbs but over a great ring of keys, carved in such fidelity that Harry could count the wards on each. The system surfaced its line. Armando Dippet, the keeper of the keys, legacy, the institution, the locked rooms, the machinery of the seal. "You have come for the how of it," Dippet said, waking, and his voice was exactly what Harry had expected and somehow sadder, a measured administrative weariness, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years being the reasonable one in rooms where reason was not enough. The others gave you their crafts, the stone, the mercy, the tongue, the eye, fine gifts, romantic gifts. But a seal is not held by craft alone, boy, it is held by procedure, by the boring and unglamorous keeping of 1,000 small arrangements that no one sings about, and that is what I kept, and that is what you have come at last sensibly to take. Kneel and I will give you the machinery, and I warn you now, it is the least beautiful and the most useful thing in this hall, and when you have it, you will understand the cost of the mending exactly and completely, and you will not be able to ununderstand it. Are you certain? Yes, Harry said, and knelt and took Armando Dippet into himself, and the machinery came. It was not a flood of grandeur, it was a flood of order. Where Brackenmore had given him the singing architecture of the deep, Dippet gave him the filing of it, the exact and exhaustive knowledge of how the seal was administered, and Harry felt his mind fill with 1,000 small necessary things. He learned the locks, that the door to the rest was one of 7, that the others opened onto galleries and mechanisms and the deep chambers where the anchor stones were tended, and that each had its key woven into the office of headmaster in a way that no ministry order could touch, because the keys were not the school's and never had been. He learned the protocols, how a dying warden was brought down and laid in place and woven in, how the wheel was read, how the load was balanced across the strands, the whole grave liturgy of 1,000 years of holding. And he learned the mechanism of the mending entire, and it was exactly as terrible as Dumbledore had said, and worse, because now Harry did not merely know that a warden died, he knew how. The wheel was fed by the ley lines, as Everard had shown him. But the ley line's power was raw, too vast and too wild to pour directly into a working as delicate as the seal. It had to be shaped and stepped down and made gentle, and the thing that shaped it was a living will. A warden woven into the wheel became the shaping will, the valve, the living lens through which the earth's brute magic was focused into the fine sustaining light of the seal. And the focusing burned the warden the way a lens left in the sun chars the paper beneath it, only from the inside and slowly over the space of a single night, until there was nothing left of the warden but the shape they had made of themselves in the weaving, an anchor stone and a strand and a portrait upstairs that remembered being alive. It was not a sacrifice in the way Harry had pictured, a knife and an altar and a moment. It was a night spent being poured out. 91 people had lain down in the deep and spent a night being poured through, one drop at a time, into the light that held the end of the world, and had died at dawn empty, and every one of them had known exactly what the night would be, because Armando Dippet had administered it, and now Harry knew it too, and could not unknow it. Legacy inherited. Armando Dippet, the keeper of the keys. You have received the machinery of the seal, the 7 LOCKS, the protocols of the mending. Wardens inherited, 5 of 91. Now you are sick with it, Dippet observed, not unkindly, as I was when my predecessor gave it to me, and as she was, and back, good. A warden who learns the mending and is not sickened by it is a warden who will one day administer it too easily to someone he ought to have died for himself. Keep the sickness. It is the only thing that has ever kept the office honest. A pause, weary and precise. And now, because you are clever, you are already looking for the flaw in the machinery. The way out, the mending that does not end in a poured-out life. I administered this seal for 40 years, boy, and I looked for that flaw every one of them, and I never found it, and I want you to hear me say that before you break your heart on it. I never found it. But the measured voice slowed and weighed and gave Harry the one thing Dumbledore had not been able to. I never had all of you in one place. The flaw, if it exists, is not in any one craft. It is in the seam between them, in the place where the mason's load and the healer's edge and the watchman's sight and the matron's wall all meet at once, which they have never done in any living mind in the whole history of the office. If it can be found, it will be found by you or by no one. Now get up. You have a second grave to open and less charm to spend on it, because the woman you are about to meet had none. Harry got up and crossed the aisle and came to the bed of Eupraxia Mole. She was the iron woman with the portcullis, the one he had taken at first for a suit of armor, and her carved face under its carved helm was broad and hard and entirely without patience, and Harry could feel her before he knelt, a bracing martial presence like the smell of cold iron before a storm. The system surfaced her line. Eupraxia Mole, the Iron Matron, Legacy, the defense of the walls, the siege craft, the holding of the line. Stop dithering and kneel, said Eupraxia Mole, before he had decided to, in a voice like a portcullis dropping. You have spent a month collecting delicate men who taught you delicate things, and now there is an army coming down your stairs, and you have finally remembered that a castle is, before it is anything else, a fortress, and a fortress is held by those who are willing to stand in the gate and not move. That is me. That is what I kept. I established the trolls that walk these halls at night, boy. I laid the wards that turn an intruder's own fear against him. I made this school a thing that does not merely house children, but defends them. And I did it because in my day the school was nearly lost 3 times to those who thought a place of learning would be soft, and I taught them each time exactly how soft. Kneel, and I will teach you too. Harry knelt and took Eupraxia mole, and where the others had come as flood and order and opinion, she came as spine. It was the most physical of the inheritances, a martial certainty that ran down through him and set his shoulders and squared his stance before his mind had caught up to it. He learned the defense of the walls, the wards that had lain dormant in the castle since her day, the sleeping strength of the place, how to wake it, how to turn the school itself into a thing that resisted. Learned siegecraft, the holding of a line, the art of making a narrow place cost an attacker more than the attacker could pay. He learned the trolls, still there, still patrolling, bound by her working to the deep protection of the school, answerable, he discovered with a jolt, to a warden who knew the word. And he learned the thing that mattered most for Friday, the thing that made her the right grave to open with 3 days left. He learned that the deep of Hogwarts was not, in law or in ward, part of the school at all. They never understood it, Eupraxia Mole said, with grim satisfaction. Not the ministry, not the governors, not any authority that ever tried to reach into this castle's cellars. The founders were cleverer than all of them. The school sits on the land. But the deep works, the rest, the seal, the whole of the holding, those were laid down as a separate trust, warded and chartered apart, belonging to no crown and no ministry and no age, answerable only to the office of warden, which is not the same as the office of headmaster, though the two have worn the same face for 1,000 years. Dippet knows the charter. I know the wall that enforces it. Between us, boy, we can tell you a thing that is worth more than any spell you have taken tonight. The iron voice rang like a gate. That woman's lawful order grants her the deep beneath the school, but the deep beneath the school is not the deep that holds the seal. Her order does not reach the trust, it cannot, and if she tries to force the door of the trust with a ministry writ, the writ is void and the forcing is trespass, and the wall I built has every right in law and magic to stop her at the gate. Legacy inherited. Eupraxia Mole, the Iron Matron. You have received the defense of the walls, the siegecraft, the word of the trolls. Wardens inherited, 6 of 91. Harry stood in the risen light with 6 wardens convened behind his eyes, and for the first time the council in his skull was not 4 crafts loosely allied but something closer to mind, a mason and a healer and a manipulator and a watchman and a keeper and a matron, and he could feel them beginning to talk to one another, beginning to fit, and in the fitting, at the seam Dippet had named, something began, very faintly, to glimmer. He sat down on the cold floor of the hall among the graves and began to think, and the 6 of them thought with him. It went like this. The seal needed a shaping will, a living lens, and the shaping burned the will to nothing in a night. That was the machinery. Dippet had given it to him whole. But why one will, why one lens, burned entire? Because Dippet answered from within him, there had only ever been one warden at a time with the craft to serve, and one lens is used up fast because one lens carries the whole load. And Brackenmore slow, a load carried by one hand crushes the hand. A load carried by many hands is nothing to any of them. And Everard sharp, the wheel has 91 strands and they share the holding. Why should the shaping will not be shared the same way? And Diley's gentle because a shaping will must be alive, and until tonight there was only ever one living warden. And Eupraxia iron, and now there are 6 in one skull. And Phineas cold silk, delighted, 6 in climbing. Do you see it yet, boy? Do you see what you are? Harry saw it. He did not have it whole. It was a glimmer, not a plan, and it would take everything he had left to turn the glimmer into a working before Friday, and even then it might not hold. But he saw the shape of it. A single living warden woven into the wheel was a lens that burned out in a night because a single will could not carry the ley line's load and survive. But a warden who was not one will but many, a whole council of the craft alive in one skull, could spread the shaping across all of them, no single strand of him carrying enough to burn, the way the wheel itself spread its load across 91, and a load spread wide enough is a load no one dies of. He would not need to feed the wheel a life. He would need to become a wheel himself, a living echo of the Great One, and stand between the ley lines and the seal not as a lens that chars but as a prism that endures. And if he could do that, if he could take enough of the dead into himself and teach them to share the shaping the way they shared everything else, then the oldest law of the castle, the law that amending cost a life, would simply cease to be true because it had only ever been true for the singular, and Harry was, deliberately and increasingly, no longer singular at all. The council did not let him enjoy the glimmer unexamined. That was the value of them, and the difficulty. A mind with 6 centuries in it does not applaud a clever idea, it interrogates it. Dippet found the first flaw at once, dry and precise. A prism that spreads the load survives only if it is broad enough, and no one living knows how broad is broad enough because no one has ever tried, and the only way to learn is to weave in and find out, and if the answer is not broad enough, you learn it by dying. Eupraxia found the second. A prism must hold steady under the full pour of the ley lines, and a will that flinches at the wrong moment shatters, and there is no ward against flinching but experience, which you do not have. And Everard, coldest and most useful, found the third, the one that mattered. Even if the prism holds, even if it is broad enough and steady enough, it must be woven in at the right moment, at the turn of the wheel when the seal calls for its strand, and that moment cannot be chosen or hurried. It comes when the seal is ready and not before. And you, Harry Potter, are trying to schedule an apotheosis around a ministry inspection, which is the single most absurd sentence any warden has ever thought, and it may yet get you killed. Then I'll be broad enough and I won't flinch, and I'll take the moment when it comes instead of when it's convenient, Harry said to all of them, and heard how young it sounded and meant it anyway, because the alternative was Dumbledore poured out for a decade and a boy left to do this again alone in 10 years' time. You're not telling me it won't work, you're telling me it's never been tried. Those aren't the same thing. They've never been the same thing, or none of you would be down here, because every single one of you did a thing that had never been tried, the first time it was tried. That's the whole job. I'm just the first one who gets to try it without dying at the end, if I'm good enough and lucky enough and there are enough of you. He got to his feet in the risen light. So let's make sure there are enough of you. That's the third answer, he said aloud to the 6 of them, to the hall, to the 91 lights burning steady in the dark. That's what the door opened for, not to pick who dies, to make someone who's too many people to die. The hall did not answer in words. But every one of the 91 lights brightened at once, 91 small suns flaring in the vault. The anchor stones of 91 poured out lives blazing up together, and Harry understood it for what it was, which was not applause and not permission, but something graver than either, recognition. The dead had seen, for the first time in 900 years, a warden who might not have to join them, and they wanted it. Every poured out one of them wanted it, wanted the law that had killed them to die instead, and their wanting filled the hall with light, and Harry knelt in the middle of it with 6 of them in his skull and 85 still waiting, and 3 days to become enough of them to matter. Then he went up because Dumbledore was waiting to tell him a thing he had been a coward about, and Harry thought he knew now what it was. He was right. I have been preparing to be the sacrifice, Dumbledore said. He said it plainly in the empty office at 2 in the morning, with the portraits pretending to sleep and not one of them asleep. Since the summer, since I understood the seal would call for a strand within the year and knew I could not answer in the old way. I am not a warden and cannot be a lens. A caretaker woven into that wheel would burn in an hour rather than a night and hold nothing. But I have spent a long life learning how to spend it, and I calculated that if I gave the whole of what I am, all my magic and all my years and all the small terrible skills I have never been proud of, I might buy the seal a decade. 1 decade, time enough, I hoped, for a true warden to be found and made ready to do it properly. His blue eyes found Harry's. And then a door opened for a 16-year-old, and I have spent these weeks in the particular hell of the old, which is to watch someone young become capable of carrying the thing you had resigned yourself to dying under, and to feel, God forgive me, relief, and to be ashamed of the relief, because the price of my relief is that the burden passes to a child I swore to protect. It doesn't pass to me, Harry said, and it doesn't fall on you. That's what I came up to tell you. And he told him. He told him the whole of the glimmer, the shared shaping, the prism that endures, the load spread wide enough that no one dies of it, and he watched 30 years of a man's resignation come apart in the dark and be replaced by something more dangerous than resignation, which was hope, and he was careful telling it to say the true thing underneath as well. It might not work, I want you to hear that. I've got 6 of them and I need more, and I don't know how many more, and I might run out of time before I run out of graves, and if I do, then we're back to your decade and your sacrifice, and I'll help you make it count. But if it works, sir, if it works, nobody lays down in that wheel ever again. Not you, not me, not the 92nd or the 100th or any of them ever. That's worth 3 days of trying before we settle for dying. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was not quite steady, and neither of them remarked on it. You have given an old man a very difficult gift, Harry, he said. You have taken away the comfort of my martyrdom and replaced it with the terror of your success. I find I prefer the terror. I did not expect to. He rose and crossed to the window and looked out at the grounds where Friday was coming. Cordelia arrives at noon. She will go to the entrance hall and read her order aloud, because she is a woman who does things in the correct sequence, and then she will demand to be taken down. I can delay the reading perhaps by an hour, no more. What you intend to do, Harry, in the deep, to make yourself into your prism, you had best have done it or be very close to done before her boots are on my stairs. Because when she reaches the door of the trust and the wall stops her, as you tell me it must, she will not simply go home. She will lay siege, and a siege is a shock to the deep stone repeated hour after hour, and the northern arc is shored but the other 6 are not, and I do not know how long a thinning strand holds under a siege, and neither, I think, do you. No, Harry admitted, I don't, but I know a woman who does. Eupraxia Mole rang like a gate in the back of his skull, grimly pleased to be needed. 3 days, I'll be ready, or I'll be close enough that ready and close enough stop mattering. 3 days nearly broke him, and not in the way he had braced for. He had thought the danger would be the body, the deep tiredness that shoring the ark had left in his marrow, the sickness that came with the borrowing. That was there, and it was real, and Diles taught him to manage it, to eat when the council told him to eat and sleep when they told him to sleep, and treat his own flesh as a resource to be husbanded rather than a nuisance to be overridden. But the body was not the danger. The danger was the crowd. He went down 4 times in 3 days, and each time he took another of the dead, and the taking got harder, not easier, because every new voice was another will accustomed to being master, and the space behind his eyes grew loud. He took a headmistress who had been a great enchantress of light and warmth, and a headmaster who had been a scholar of the deep dark arts and had spent his headship studying the very things he warded against, and a mistress of potions who had once physicked a plague out of the whole of the Highlands, and a woman who had been a diplomat to the goblin nations. And by the 9th grave the council in his skull was no longer a tidy round table of 6 but a hall of many, all of them talking. All of them offering all of them in the moments when Harry's own grip loosened, reaching for the wheel. That was the thing no one had fully warned him of. Each warden woven into the seal had spent their death holding, and the holding was the deepest habit any of them had, and when Harry brought them alive into his skull they wanted, all of them with the whole force of 900 years of practice, to go back to the wheel and hold, and the wheel was death, and only Harry's own living will stood between the council and the grave they all, in their bones, still longed for. On the second night he nearly lost the argument. He was in the rest with 11 of them inside him and had reached for a 12th, and somewhere in the taking his own voice had gone thin under the weight of theirs, and for a long terrible moment Harry Potter had simply not been the loudest person in his own head. It was Diles who pulled him back, and Phineas, oddly, the healer and the manipulator together, the one saying you are still the body, feel the body, the cold floor, the ache in your knees, you, and the other saying dry and urgent, they are levers, boy, every one of them, and you are the hand, do not become a lever, hold the hand. And Harry had crawled back up into the front of his own skull, one handhold at a time, and lain on the cold stone shaking with 11 silenced wardens, and understood finally and completely what Dumbledore had meant on the very first morning. Trust the thing you were before this began more than the thing it is making of you. When they start to disagree, come to me. He had not come to Dumbledore, he had come close to not being able to. Above ground, in the daylight, his ordinary life frayed to a thread. He slept in classes. He missed a Quidditch practice, the first he had ever missed, and did not notice until Ron found him in the library with his head down on a book he had not opened. Hermione stopped asking what was wrong, which was worse than the asking, and started simply appearing at his elbow with food, and sitting with him in a silence that had given up on answers and settled for company. On the third afternoon she put a bar of chocolate in front of him without a word, Honeyjuke's best, the kind she rationed, and Harry looked at it and looked at her tired, stubborn face and came within a single breath of telling her everything, the door and the dead and the wheel and the Friday that was coming, and did not, because he was 11 wardens deep and could feel, with Phineas's cold clarity, exactly how the telling would go, how the danger would pass to her the moment she believed him. How she would insist on helping, and how the helping would put her in the deep on Friday where the hollow marked warm things against a later hunger. Eat the chocolate, Hermione said. Whatever it is, it's clearly winning, and you can't fight it on an empty stomach. That's not me being clever, that's just true. And Harry ate the chocolate, and it helped, the small, ordinary magic of a friend's rationed kindness doing a thing that no inherited craft could, and for the length of one square he was a tired 16-year-old in a warm library and not a hall of the dead learning to endure. Then the bell rang, and he got up and went back down into the deep to take a 12th. By Friday morning he had taken 15, and the prism was real, and it was not enough. He knew it was not enough the way he knew the lode paths of the castle, with a certainty that lived below argument. 15 wardens shared the shaping better than one, spread the ley line's burden wide enough that no single strand of him charred, and if the seal had called for its strand that morning, Harry believed, on balance, that he could have answered it and lived. But belief on balance was not certainty, and the difference between 15 and enough was a difference measured in the length of a night spent being poured through, and Harry did not know and could not know, and Dumbledore could not tell him, and the only way to learn whether 15 was enough was to weave himself into the wheel and find out at dawn whether he was still alive. He needed more. He needed the margin that turned believe into know, and he had run out of days. Cordelia Ashgrove arrived at noon on Friday, exactly as Dumbledore had said, and read her order aloud in the entrance hall, exactly as Dumbledore had said, and demanded to be taken down, exactly as Dumbledore had said, and Harry watched all of it through Everard's sight from the 7th floor where he had spent 3 days and 3 nights becoming something the castle had never held before. She was smaller in person than her authority, a gray woman in a gray traveling cloak, flanked by 6 of her people, competent and unhurried and armed. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She read the order in a flat, clear tone that carried to every corner of the hall, and when Dumbledore met her with his procedural courtesies she cut through them without unkindness and without delay. A woman who had been delayed for a month and had come personally to the one place delays did not work. Albus, she said, and there was history in the single word, 20 years of it. You have bought every day the law allows and several it doesn't, and I have let you because I owe you that and more. But I have an order now, and a lower foundation that 3 ministers took the trouble to hide, and 19 people in a black frame on my wall who died because I let a good man talk me into waiting. I am going down. You can take me or I can find my own way, and I would rather you took me, because I would rather this be done between friends than between a deputy and an obstruction. Which is it to be?" And Dumbledore, who could have fought her and lost, and could have stalled her and lost more, looked past her shoulder up the great staircase to where a 16-year-old stood at the top with 6 centuries of wardens in his eyes, and made the only move left on the board. "I will take you down myself, Cordelia," he said. "As far as the law reaches, and I will show you exactly where the law stops and why, and you may make of it what your conscience requires. But I will ask you to bring your people no further than I tell you, and to touch nothing, and to tread lightly, because what is down there has held for 1,000 years by being left alone, and I have watched, this very month, what happens when it is touched wrong." He offered her his arm, an old courtesy between old enemies. "Come, I will give you your inspection. I only pray you are the woman I remember, and know an answered question when you finally have one." She did not take the arm, not yet. She was reading the hall the way an auror reads a room she is about to walk into unarmed, and her gray eyes moved over the students who had gathered at the edges to watch, over the staff drawn tense along the walls, and up the great marble staircase, and stopped on Harry. He felt her see him, and he felt her read him, and it was not Phineas's kind of reading, and it was not Dumbledore's. It was an auror's, blunter and in its way more dangerous, a professional's instinct for the one thing in a room that does not fit. She did not know what he was. She could not have. The net had never chimed for him, and her records spoke of foundations and deeds, not of a boy. But 11 years of hunting the quiet accumulations of power in quiet places had taught Cordelia Ashgrove to feel the weight of a thing before she could name it, and she felt his weight now across the length of the entrance hall, the way you feel a storm 2 valleys off, and her attention settled on him and sharpened and did not let go. "Who is that?" she said, not to Dumbledore, to her second, a lean man with a recording quill who consulted his list. "Potter, ma'am," the man said, "6th year." And from the questionnaire notes, Ravel flagged him. "This school closes around him like a fist. I remember the phrase." She looked at Harry a moment longer, and Harry made himself be a tired schoolboy watching a famous visitor, and gave her nothing, and felt her decline to believe the nothing exactly as Ravel had. "Later," she said to her second, setting the 6th year on the stairs aside against a question she did not yet have the shape of. "One impossibility at a time. The foundation first." And she took Dumbledore's arm at last, because the sequence was correct now, and let herself be led toward the stairs down. But she looked back at Harry once, at the turn of the corridor, the way a hunter looks back at a track she has not finished reading, and Harry understood that whatever happened in the deep today, he had been seen, truly seen, by the one person in Britain whose whole life was the noticing of things like him, and that there would be no putting that back. They went down together, the deputy and the caretaker, into the deep of the school, and Harry, at the top of the stairs, closed the far sight and turned and walked the other way, toward the 7th-floor corridor and the blank wall and the worn stair, because the inspection was Dumbledore's to manage above and the seal was Harry's to hold below, and somewhere in the roots of the castle 6 thinning strands waited for the tread of strangers, and a wheel turned. And a glimmer that was almost a working sat half-finished behind his eyes. 15 wardens deep, 3 days without proper sleep, one impossible plan he could not test without betting his life on the test. Harry set his hand to the blank wall and felt it become a door. And time, which had waited outside the Hall of the Dead for 1,000 years, had finally, on a gray Friday at noon, come inside and found him already climbing down to meet it. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The War Warden. The wall stopped Cordelia Ashgrove exactly where Eupraxia Mole had said it would. Harry felt the whole of it from the deep, where he knelt among the ley lines with 15 wardens in his skull and the half-made prism turning behind his eyes, because a warden in the roots of the castle felt everything the roots felt, and the roots felt the deputy for educational security arrive at the door of the trust with a lawful order and a company of aurors and the flat certainty of a woman who had been delayed for a month. He felt Dumbledore bring her down the honest way, through the 7 galleries the law allowed, showing her the old dry cisterns and the disused vaults and the founder's storerooms, spending the truth like a man paying a debt he had put off too long. And he felt them reach the 8th door, the one that was not the school's, the one warded and chartered apart, answerable to no crown and no ministry and no age, and he felt Ashgrove put her hand to it and speak her order aloud, and he felt the wall wake. It did not strike her. Eupraxia's wall had never struck anyone who did not strike it first. That was the whole of its cunning. It simply became, under her hand, unanswerable. The door that had been a door was suddenly a fact of the world, older than her authority, deaf to her writ, and the ancient charter that Dippet had carried into Harry's skull rose through the stone and made itself known to her not as a spell but as a boundary in law, the way a cliff edge makes itself known to a man walking in fog, here and no further, and the not further is not cruelty but the shape of the ground. "Albus," Harry heard her say, through the walls, in the flat voice that never rose. "What is this?" "The place where the law stops," Dumbledore said. "I told you I would show it to you. This is it. Beyond this door is a thing that predates the ministry, the Wisengamot, the statute, and the crown that chartered them all, held in a trust that answers to none of them, and your order, Cordelia, is void against it, not because I say so, but because 6 centuries of law says so, and I can show you the charter, and you will read it, because you are a woman who reads, and you will find that I am right. A pause waited. And then you will have a choice to make that no order can make for you. She read the charter. Harry felt her do it through the stone, through Dippet's borrowed knowledge of the very document, felt Dumbledore produce it from wherever the office kept the things it did not show the governors, and felt her take it and read it, all of it, standing in the 8th gallery by the light of her own wand while her Aurors waited, because that was who she was, and a woman who had caught 3 fugitives by reading was not going to be stopped by an order to stop reading. It was old law, and it was good law, and it was airtight, chartered apart by 4 founders who had understood better than any minister since that some things must answer to no crown lest a crown one day use them. She read it twice. Harry could feel the second reading, slower than the first, the reading of a professional looking not for the meaning but for the flaw, and finding none because there was none, and setting the parchment down at last with the particular stillness of a person who has just been told, in language she cannot argue with, that the tool she has trusted her whole life does not reach the place she needs it to reach. Harry, in the deep listening, thought that Dumbledore had played it as well as it could be played, and that it would not be enough, because he had watched Cordelia Ashgrove across a ministry office through a portrait's eyes, and he knew the one thing the play did not account for. She had not come because the law told her to. She had come because 19 names in a black frame told her to, and the law had only ever been the tool she used to obey them. Show a woman like that the edge of the law, and she does not turn back. She looks for the place where the law runs out and her duty keeps going, and she steps across it, because she has done it before once and buried 19 people for having done it too late. Then I will force it, Cordelia Ashgrove said, under emergency provision. I will record my reasons, and I will answer for them to the Wisengamot, and if I am wrong they will break me for it, and I will let them. But I have 3 redacted surveys and a wall that answers a writ with a law older than the writ, and in my experience, Albus, the things that hide behind laws older than the law are precisely the things that end in a black frame. Stand aside, I am going through. And she set her company to the door, 6 trained Aurors and herself, and they began methodically, without heat, to break 1,000 years of holding. Harry felt the first blow land on the wall, and he felt the wall answer, and he felt, far off in the northern arc in the 6 thinning strands, the deep stone take the shock and pass it inward, exactly as Everard had promised, a fool going down to look with too heavy a tread, and he was moving before the second blow fell, because a shock to the deep stone repeated hour after hour was a siege, and the strands would not hold a siege, and the nearest of the 6 to the trust door was the thinnest of them all. He ran, and as he ran the council ran the arithmetic with him, and none of them liked the sum. 15 wardens deep was enough, perhaps, to be a prism and survive the weaving. It was not enough to weave in this instant, unprepared, with a strand failing and a siege battering the deep. Go, said Vane, tempo already rising in him. Do not think about the weaving. There is no wheel here to weave into, only a strand about to fail and people about to die where it fails. A soldier who fights tomorrow's battle loses today's. And Harry took the counsel and ran toward the failing strand with a single question left in him, which was not how do I survive this, but how do I keep them alive, and that, Vane observed with grim approval, was the only question a warden was ever allowed to ask in a breach. It failed on the 11th blow. He was still 50 yards from it, running through galleries no living foot had touched in 3 centuries, when he felt the strand let go, not the slow tearing of the northern arc but a clean sudden parting, a strand of the great wheel snapping under a load it had been failing toward for 100 years, and that 11 Aurors' blows had finished in an afternoon. And through the parting, into the deep galleries where Cordelia Ashgrove stood breaking down a door, came the unmade. They were the first of the hollow that Harry had ever seen with anything like eyes, and he understood at once why the founders had built a mountain to keep them under it. They were not creatures. They were the cold he had felt in Nia Fenwick's ribs given just enough shape to move, wraiths of subtraction, places in the air where the light and the sound and the warmth had been quietly deleted, drifting up through the parted strand into the galleries like smoke made of absence. Where they passed, the torches did not gutter, they simply forgot to have been lit, and the gallery behind the unmade was not dark but unlit, a distinction Harry's mind refused at first and then accepted with a lurch. They made no sound. They wanted nothing but to fill, and there was, at the top of the parted strand, a gallery full of the warmest things they had encountered in 1,000 years, 7 living people, breathing, bright, unaware. Cordelia Ashgrove turned from the door she had been breaking and saw death drifting toward her people in a form no Auror training had prepared her for, and Harry, rounding the last corner, saw her do the thing that told him everything he had needed to know about her and had refused, until that moment, to fully believe. She did not run. She put herself between the unmade and her people, and she raised her wand, and she began calmly to fight a thing that could not be fought, buying with her own body the seconds her aurors needed to fall back. Her curses passed through the unmade and unhappened. Of course they did. You cannot hex a hole. And Harry Potter, 16 years old, 15 wardens deep, came around the corner into the unlit gallery and understood that he had a healer and a mason and a watchman and a matron and a keeper and a manipulator in his skull, and not one of them knew how to win a fight, and that he needed in the next 4 seconds the one craft he had not yet taken, and that there was a grave for it in the Hall of the Dead and no time at all to go and kneel by it. So he called, and the hall answered. He would never be able to explain how. Dippet's protocols, perhaps some emergency provision of the office older than any of them, or the seal itself, recognizing its warden in extremity, or simple need, the oldest magic there was, reaching down the strands to the one grave that could serve. He threw his whole back toward the Hall of the Dead and toward a bed he had marked and passed and not yet opened, and he called the war warden by the title the system had never yet shown him. And across 900 years of rock a voice answered him like a blade drawn in the dark, and the inheritance came not as a slow kneeling but as a battlefield commission, granted on the run in the breach with the enemy already through the wire. Marius Vane, the war warden. Legacy battle magic, the transfiguration of the fight, the turning of the lost cause. Inherit, inherit, Harry said out loud in the unlit gallery, and Marius Vane came into him at a dead run. Where the others had arrived as flood and order and opinion and spine, Vane arrived as tempo. Harry felt the whole speed of a fight open up in front of him, the way a chess master feels the whole board, only faster. The geometry of threat and answer laid out in lines of force he could suddenly read as easily as Brackenmore read load. He felt 3 centuries of a man who had turned lost battles, who had stood in the gate of a burning school against the goblin siege of an age no book remembered and turned it, who had learned that a fight is not won by power but by tempo, by making the enemy answer you until they have no answer left. And he felt under the tempo the exhilaration, the terrible clean joy of a craftsman at the one work he was made for, and Harry took it and used it, and for the length of the battle that followed he was not afraid, because Marius Vane had never once in 300 years been afraid in a fight and had bequeathed the not being afraid along with the craft. The years came with him as they always came, the packed sediment of a life, and Vane's life had been the turning of lost causes. Harry felt a burning school in an age no history remembered, felt the goblin siege break against a gate that should have fallen, and did not because one man stood in it and refused, felt the particular cold logic of the outnumbered, the arithmetic of the last hour of a battle everyone but the fighter has already conceded. Vane had not been a great wizard in the way the histories counted greatness. He had been something rarer, a man who understood that a fight is a conversation, and that the winner is not the stronger speaker but the one who leaves the enemy with nothing left to say. He had died old in his bed, the only war warden ever to do so, and he had lain down in the deep not because the wheel called for him, but because he had chosen to, the day he understood that his tempo, woven into the seal, would let it answer threats no dead mason ever could. He was the one grave in the hall that had come to the dark grinning, and the grin was in Harry now in the unlit gallery, 16 deep, with a tide of subtraction rising towards 7 living people, and it was the most dangerous and the most useful thing Harry Potter had ever carried. Legacy inherited. Marius Vane, the war warden. You have received battle magic, the transfiguration of the fight, the turning of the lost cause. Wardens inherited, 16 of 91. The gold letters hung for half a heartbeat in the unlit gallery, and then Harry moved, and the whole council moved with him, and for the first time all 16 of them fought as one. He did not try to destroy the unmade. Vane knew better in the first half-second. You cannot destroy a hole, you can only drive it back to the hole it came from and shut the door. So Harry fought a battle of tempo and terrain, and every warden in his skull lent their craft to it at once, and the fighting was the most beautiful thing he had ever done. Brackenmore gave him the gallery itself, and Harry sang the stone, and the floor rose in walls and the walls became a funnel, herding the drifting unmade away from Ashgrove and her people and toward the parted strand. Everard gave him the whole shape of the fight at once, every wraith and every living body in the exact moment each unmade would reach each person, so that Harry was never once surprised, never once a beat behind. Eupraxia gave him the wards, and he woke the sleeping defenses of the deep and turned them against the cold, walls of old protective fire that the unmade could not unhappen because they were not light but law, the castle's own refusal to be entered. In Vane conducted all of it, the tempo of it, the transfiguration of the fight. Where a wraith slipped the funnel and reached for one of the fallen back aurors, Harry did not curse it because a curse would unhappen. He transfigured the air in its path to a lattice of iron cold enough that the unmade, a thing of subtraction, could find nothing left to subtract, and it recoiled, baffled, from a cold deeper than its own. Where 3 of them came at Ashgrove together, Harry raised a wall of Brackenmore's stone, and healed it in the same motion with Dylies's craft, so that it grew faster than they could reach through it, a living rampart weeping shut around the gallery like a wound closing. He was mason and healer and watchman and matron and warmaster in the same breath, 16 crafts braided into one continuous act, and the unmade which had drifted patient and unanswerable up through the parted strand expecting a gallery of warm helpless things, met instead a single 16-year-old who was somehow a whole garrison, and for the first time in 1,000 years the cold had to give ground. It did not give it cheaply. The unmade learned in their patient bottomless way, and Harry felt them learning, felt the drifting wraiths begin to spread, to stop clustering where his funnels could herd them and instead thin themselves across the whole width of the gallery, a tide of subtraction seeping along the floor and up the walls and across the unlit ceiling, seeking the gaps between his workings the way water seeks the flaw in a dam. Vane read the change in the same instant it happened. "They spread to make you spread," the war warden said, crisp and unhurried, the voice of a man who had watched 100 enemies try 100 clevernesses and answered every one. "Do not spread. A garrison that thins its line to match the enemy's line has already lost because the enemy is more numerous than you and always will be. Hold the narrow place. Make them come to the narrow place. Give ground you can afford and hold the ground you cannot." So Harry gave ground. He let the tide of cold have the wide mouth of the gallery, let it flow and spread and unlight the whole broad chamber, and he fell back with Ashgrove's orders to the narrow throat where the gallery pinched between two pillars of Brackenmoor's living stone, and there he stopped, and there he held, and the unmade, for all their spreading, could only come at him a few at a time through the throat, and a few at a time was a fight Harry could win. He sealed the throat with a wall of the old protective fire, law and not light, and where the cold pressed against it the fire held, and where the cold found the edges of the fire Harry was there, in the seam, transfiguring the very air to iron-cold lattices the unmade could not pass masonwork and warwork in the same breath, and behind him 7 aurors who had come to arrest a schoolboy crouched in the dark and watched the schoolboy hold a door against the end of the world. One of them broke. It was the youngest, a man barely out of training, and the unlit dark and the silent drifting cold were more than his nerve could carry, and he bolted up the gallery, away from the throat, toward what he took for safety, and what Everard's sight showed Harry was a dead end where a stray tongue of the spreading tide had already pooled. Harry felt the man run and felt where he was running and knew, with the flat battlefield arithmetic Vane had given him, that saving him meant leaving the throat for the length of 3 heartbeats, and that leaving the throat for 3 heartbeats might cost him the whole line and everyone behind it. Vane's verdict was immediate and pitiless. You cannot hold the throat. 1 life is not the line. And Diley's at the same instant, fierce. He is 20 years old and afraid, and you are the only one who can reach him. And Harry, who was neither the war warden nor the healer but the living will that stood between them, made the choice that was his alone to make. He did not leave the throat, he extended it. He threw a lance of Brackenmoor's stone up the gallery, a bridge of living rock raised in a single sung breath, and he ran the old protective fire along it like a fuse, and he snatched the fleeing auror off his feet with a hard practical charm and hauled him back down the bridge of fire above the pooling cold, all without stepping out of the throat, mason and war master braiding a solution that neither could have found alone. The young auror landed hard among his fellows, alive, unerased, shaking, and Harry did not have a spare half-second to reassure him, because the moment his attention had split the unmade had surged the throat, and now he paid for the split, and now the real fight began. For a stretch of time Harry could never afterward measure. He held the narrow place against a tide that did not tire and could not be killed, and it was the hardest thing he had ever done, and somewhere in the middle of it the danger he had nearly died of on the second night came for him again. 16 wardens fighting as one was a glory when it worked and a mob when it frayed, and under the grinding load of the fight it began to fray. Everyone wanted to fight their own war. Vane wanted tempo, Eupraxia wanted to dig in and never yield an inch. Brackenmoor wanted to preserve the stone. The dark arts scholar he had taken on the second day wanted coldly to try things on the unmade that Harry would not let himself try. And for one terrible moment, holding the throat with the cold pressing on every side, Harry Potter was again not the loudest voice in his own skull, and the workings began to stutter as 16 hands reached for the same wand at once. "Hold the hand," said Phineas, urgent, the manipulator turned lifeline. "You are the hand, they are levers. Pick the lever the moment needs and drop the rest." And Harry, with the cold 4 inches from his face, did the thing that was the whole secret of the prism and the whole secret of surviving the crowd. He did not silence them and he did not obey them. He chose. He took Vane's tempo and Eupraxia's wall and Brackenmoor's stone and Diley's mercy and Everard's sight, the 5 he needed, and he set the other 11 gently aside, not shut out but set down, held ready and not heeded, and the stutter stopped and the line steadied, and Harry understood in the middle of a battle the thing he would need to understand at the bottom of the world in a day's time, that being many was not the danger, and being overwhelmed by the many was not the danger either. The danger was forgetting that the choosing was his. The prism did not endure because it was broad. It endured because at its center there was a will that stayed a will and chose and kept choosing, and never once let the choosing be taken from it. With the choosing back in his hand, the fight changed. Harry stopped defending the throat and began, in Vane's phrase, to spend it. He gave a yard deliberately, drawing the tide forward into the narrow place, and when the unmade crowded the throat to pour through the ground he had seeded, he closed it behind them with a wall of sung stone, cutting a portion of the cold off from the rest, and then he did to the trapped portion the only thing that worked, which was not a curse and not a killing, but a return. He could not destroy a hole. Vane had known it, Everard had known it, the whole council had known it. But a warden who was also a mason and a healer could take a pocket of subtraction, walled off and alone, and sing the stone around it tighter and tighter, and heal the seams shut and shrink the pocket down and down until the unlit nothing had nowhere left to be, and squeeze it patiently, remorselessly, back through the fabric of the deep toward the parted strand it had leaked from, the way you work a splinter back out of a wound. The trapped unmade did not die. It went home unwillingly, expelled from a world that had, for the first time in 1,000 years, learned how to close itself against it. He did it again and again. Wall off a pocket, cut it from the tide, shrink it, expel it, and each time the great mass of the cold in the wide gallery grew a little less, and each time Vane's tempo quickened, and each time the 7 aurors behind him understood a little more completely that they were watching something that had no name in the language of their office. It was not offense and it was not defense. It was housework, done at the scale of the apocalypse, a boy tidying the end of the world back into its cupboard, one pocket of nothing at a time. And it was working, and the cold, which did not know how to be afraid because fear was a warmth it did not have, nonetheless began to withdraw, to gather itself back toward the breach, to concede the unlit gallery yard by reclaimed yard to the single 16-year-old who would not stop closing doors. He drove them back down the gallery, funnel by funnel, ward by ward, tempo by tempo, back toward the parted strand they had come through, and Cordelia Ashgrove stood in the ruin of her inspection with her wand still raised and watched a schoolboy do a thing that her whole life of hunting dark accumulations of power had taught her to fear, and did not, Harry saw through Everard's sight, mistake it for what she had feared. She had spent 11 years learning the difference between power that takes and power that shields. She was watching the second kind. She lowered her wand a fraction, not in surrender and recognition, and Harry felt her begin, against every instinct her office had drilled into her, to understand. Then the last of the unmade, driven to the lip of the parted strand, did the thing the hollow always did when cornered, which was not to fight but to reach past the fighter for the warmest thing left, and the warmest thing left was Cordelia Ashgrove, who had put herself nearest the breach, and it went through Harry's funnel in a place his attention had left for half a second, and it touched her. She did not scream, she was not the kind. She simply folded silent, the cold going into her the way it had gone into Nia Fenwick, patches of subtraction spreading from her left side where the wraith had brushed her, and her aurors shouted and could do nothing, and Harry felt through Everard's sight exactly how long she had, which was not long, and made the choice a warden makes 100 times and never gets used to. He let the last wraith go. He let it slip back down the parted strand unfought, because chasing it would cost him the 4 seconds Cordelia Ashgrove had left, and he crossed the unlit gallery and dropped to his knees beside the deputy for educational security, the woman who had come to end whatever he was, and he put his hands on her cold splintered side and told her body where its edges were. It was Nia Fenwick again, only worse, because Ashgrove was older and the wraith had touched her nearer the great vessels, and Harry had Diles at the front of his mind and 15 other wardens holding the gallery steady around him and the whole braided craft of the Hall of the Dead pouring through his 2 hands, and he drew the line and told the cold this far and no further, and told the living flesh, here is your edge, hold, heel inward, let the dead coin go. And Cordelia Ashgrove, who had not let anyone put hands on her in grief or in healing in 11 years, lay in the unlit deep of Hogwarts and let a 16-year-old wall the hollows cold out of her body, and drew one long shuddering breath and opened her gray eyes and looked at Harry from a distance of 6 inches with an expression he would remember for the rest of his life, because it was the look of a woman recalculating everything at once. You're the weight I felt on the stairs, she said. Her voice was thin, but it did not shake. The one that didn't fit, it was you the whole time. It was me the whole time, Harry agreed. His hands were still on her side, still holding the line, still telling her flesh to heal. Don't move yet. The cold's walled off, but it's not gone, and if you move, you'll tear it. Give me another minute. Then you can arrest me if you still want to. Something that was almost in the unlit dark, a laugh. Arrest you. She lay still as told and let him work, and looked past his shoulder at the parted strand and the funnels of raised stone and the walls of old protective fire still burning down the gallery, the whole battlefield of a fight she had walked into blind. For what? For being the only thing in this hole that fought for us. I came down here certain I'd find a dark accumulation of power hidden under a school. Her eyes came back to his face. I found one. I was just wrong about which direction it was pointed. Around them, the unlit gallery was slowly remembering itself. Where the unmade had passed, the deleted torches did not relight, but the ordinary dark returned, which was a mercy, because ordinary dark is a thing the mind can hold and unlight is not. Harry's raised funnels of stone still stood, and the walls of old protective fire still burned low along the gallery, throwing a red uncertain light over 7 Aurors sitting or slumped against the founder's walls, alive, staring at him, and Harry felt the weight of the staring and had no strength left to manage it. The battle had cost the living body what the borrowing could not pay, exactly as Diles had warned, and now that the tempo had released him he could feel every second of it, the marrow-deep exhaustion, the fine tremor in his hands, the particular emptied feeling of a man who has poured out more than he owned and will be collecting the debt from himself for a week. He stayed on his knees beside Ashgrove because standing was, for the moment, beyond negotiation, and he kept one hand on her side out of a healer's caution and one small private cowardice, which was that he was not certain if he took the hand away that his arm would agree to lift again. Dumbledore reached them then at last, an old man who had come down the galleries at a run he was too old for, and he took in the scene in a single sweep, the driven back cold, the raised stone, the deputy alive on the floor with Harry's hands on her side, and something in his face that had been braced for a month eased, and something else sharper took its place. "She has seen," he said. It was not a question. "She's seen," Harry said, not looking up, still holding the line. "All of it. And she's not going to arrest me, and she's not going to force that door because I just saved her life and because she's not a fool, and because in about a minute I'm going to tell her the truth, the whole of it, and she's going to help us. Because she came down here to protect people from a thing under this school, and it turns out there really is a thing under this school, and I'm the only one who can stop it, and a woman who hangs 19 names on her wall does not walk away from that." He finished the healing and lifted his hands and sat back on his heels among the graves of a war no book remembered, 16 wardens deep, and looked up at the 2 formidable adults who had spent a month circling him and told them the truth. He told them all of it, the door a map could not see, the Hall of the Dead and the risen light and the 91 poured out lives, the wheel and the ley lines and the hollow and the seal failing strand by strand. Dippet's terrible machinery and the mending that cost a life and Dumbledore's plan to be the 92nd. And the glimmer that was almost a working, the prism that endures, the third answer, the load spread wide enough that no one dies of it, 16 wardens deep and needing more. He told it in the unlit gallery with the Deputy for Educational Security lying healed at his knees, and the founder of the Order of the Phoenix standing over him in the cold of the hollow, settling back into its patience beyond the parted strand. And when he was done, neither of them spoke for a long moment, and the silence was the silence of 2 people who have spent their lives being the ones who knew the most in the room and have just stopped being that. Dumbledore broke it. "You told them everything," he said, and there was something in the old voice that Harry had not heard from him before, a note that took him a moment to place because he had never once expected to hear it directed at himself, and it was pride. "A month I spent teaching you to guard the truth, and you have just handed the whole of it to a ministry deputy in a hole in the ground, and I find, to my very great surprise, that it was the right thing to do, because there are secrets that die of being kept, and this is one, and you saw it before I did. I have been guarding this alone for 30 years, Harry, and I called the guarding wisdom, and it was only ever loneliness with a better name." He looked at the parted strand, at the driven back cold, at the guttering promise of the deep. "You have done in one afternoon what I could not do in 3 decades. You have made it a thing more than one person carries." One of the Aurors, the young one Harry had hauled off the bridge of fire, spoke from the dark, and his voice shook and he steadied it because he was 20 and had just watched the world turn out to be larger and worse and stranger than his training had allowed for. "Deputy," he said. "Ma'am." "What do we tell London?" "Nothing," said Cordelia Ashgrove from the floor before she had even sat up. "You tell London nothing, because London will do to this exactly what 3 ministers already did, which is redact it and hide it and appoint a committee, and we have watched tonight what happens when this is left to committees. You tell London the inspection found old cisterns and a legal boundary and nothing actionable, which is the truth, and you let me carry the rest, because carrying the rest is my office and my choice, and it appears my penance." A pause, "And you never speak of the boy, any of you. He is the only reason 6 of you are going up those stairs tonight instead of being quietly subtracted from the world, and the way you repay a debt like that is with silence. Am I understood?" A ragged murmur of assent from 6 Aurors in the dark. "Good." Cordelia Ashgrove sat up carefully, one hand pressed to her healed side, and looked at the parted strand and did the arithmetic, and Harry watched her do it, watched 11 years of grief and duty and iron reasoning turn toward the single largest problem she had ever been handed and lock onto it. "That strand that just failed," she said. "The one those things came through. You said there were 6 thinning. That was one. So there are 5, and a wheel that needs a whole living strand woven in, and a boy who thinks he can be that strand without dying if he's enough people, and he isn't enough people yet." She looked at Harry. "How many more do you need?" "I don't know," Harry said. "That's the problem I can't solve. Nobody knows how broad the prism has to be because nobody's ever tried, and the only way to find out is to weave in and see if I live." He met her eyes. But I know I'm closer than anyone's ever been, and I know the wheel's going to call for its strand soon, sooner now that a strand's failed, and I know the last grave I have to open is the oldest one in the hall. The first warden, the one who bound the hollow in the first place, before the founders, before the school. Everything I've taken has been getting me ready to take that one, and I think when I have it, I'll have enough. I think the first warden is the keystone. And I think I'm going to find out whether I'm right in the next day or two, because that strand didn't just fail, deputy, it parted. And a wheel that's lost a whole strand doesn't wait for anyone's schedule, it calls. As if the deep had been listening, and perhaps it had, the whole mountain shifted. It was not an earthquake. It was worse because it was not physical. It was the wheel itself, felt through every warden in Harry's skull at once, the great turning working lurching as the lost strand's absence propagated around the ring, the load it had carried slamming onto the 5 thinning strands beside it, and Harry felt all 5 of them go from thinning to straining in a single sickening instant, felt the northern arc he had shored so carefully take up a burden it had never been meant to hold, felt the whole wheel begin slowly to slow. And beyond the parted strand, in the dark so complete it made the deep rock bright, the hollow that had waited before the founders felt the wheel falter and stirred, and put its whole weightless patient enormity against the failing ring, and began, for the first time in 1,000 years, to rise. Harry felt it in every strand of himself at once, the 16 wardens and the living will that held them, and far below in the hall of the dead he felt the risen light answer. All his life in the deep the 91 small suns had burned steady, the anchor stones of the poured-out wardens glowing calm above their beds, and now, as the wheel slowed and the cold climbed, the light in the hall began to fail, not all at once. Strand by strand, as the load came onto them, the anchor stones dimmed, their steady suns guttering toward embers, the whole vast gallery of the risen light going down like a hall of candles in a rising wind, and Harry understood what he was feeling. The dead were spending themselves. The 91 who had already poured out their lives were pouring what little was left, throwing the last reserves of 9 centuries of holding against a ring that was losing its ability to hold, buying minutes, buying the living warden the only thing they had left to give him, which was time. The hall that had asked time to wait outside for 1,000 years had opened its door to it at last, and time had come in, and the dead were dying a second time to slow its passage. Somewhere at the bottom of that failing light, in the deepest and oldest dark of the hall, one anchor stone did not dim. It brightened. The first warden's grave, the effaced and eldest bed, the keystone Harry had not yet dared to open, kindled in the deep as every other light went down around it, and Harry felt it call to him across the roots of the world, not in words, in the pure imperative of a lock recognizing the one key that could turn it. And he knew that whatever the night held, it ended there, at the bottom, at the oldest grave, with the last legacy, or it did not end at all. "It's calling," Harry said, and stood, and found that he could, after all, that the body would give him this much because the moment required it, and the body, in the end, served the same will the 16 served. The 16 wardens in him stood with him, and somewhere far below the first warden's grave waited in the deepest dark of the hall, the oldest bed, the keystone, the last legacy, its light kindling brighter as every other light went down. The wheel turned slower, the cold began to climb. And Harry Potter, who 11 weeks ago had followed a pressure in the stone down a stair a map could not see, stood in the unlit deep of the school with a deputy healed at his feet and an old man's pride at his back and a whole garrison of the dead behind his eyes, and understood that everything, all of it, the descents and the inheritances and the outsmarting and the shoring and the fight, had only ever been the long climb up to this one drop. "It's calling now, Dumbledore, deputy, get your people up. Clear the deep." He looked down the galleries toward the bottom of the world, where a single light burned brighter as the dark rose around it. "Whatever happens next happens tonight, and it happens down there at the bottom of everything, and there's exactly one person who gets to go all the way down, and it's me." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Legacy inherited. They went down together as far as the deep would let them, and then Harry went the rest of the way alone. The 3 of them descended through the failing galleries, Harry and Dumbledore and Cordelia Ashgrove, past the driven-back cold and the parted strand, downstairs that no map remembered and no living foot but Harry's had walked in 1,000 years, and the deeper they went the more the light failed. In the hall of the dead above them, the 91 anchor stones were guttering one by one as the wheel took up the load of its lost strand, and the risen light that had steeped the deep for 1,000 years was going out, so that the 3 of them walked down into a dark that grew, and Harry led them by a sense that had nothing to do with eyes, the whole architecture of the deep laid out in his warden's mind, every step sure on stairs he could not see. They made an unlikely procession, and Harry, some cold, clear part of him, appreciated the strangeness of it even now. 11 weeks ago he had crept down a stair no one knew existed, alone in his socks, a boy following a pressure in the stone. Now he led the greatest wizard of the age and the most formidable officer in the ministry down into the roots of the world, and neither of them questioned the leading, because both of them had watched him earn it, and there was a kind of vertigo in that, in being the one the powerful followed into the dark. He did not let it swell him. Eupraxia would have had something withering to say about a warden who mistook being followed for being wise, and Harry could feel her not saying it, which was its own kind of instruction. He kept his feet on the stairs and his sense on the deep and his mind mostly on the arithmetic, because the arithmetic was the only thing down here that did not care how far he had come. "How much time?" Ashgrove asked once into the dark. She had drawn her traveling cloak tight, and she did not sound afraid, only precise, a woman gathering the last facts before a thing that could not be undone. "None," Harry said. "It's calling now. Every minute we've spent talking, the wheels turned a little slower and the colds climbed a little higher. That's not a reason to rush. Rushing is how you go proud, and going proud is how the seal takes you. It's a reason to be exactly as fast as I can be without being stupid, which is a speed I've had 11 weeks of practice finding." He felt Dumbledore's small, dry approval at his shoulder, and Vane's, oddly matched, the caretaker and the War Master agreeing for once, and went on down. Dumbledore did not speak until they reached the threshold. It was a plain thing, that threshold, a low arch of the eldest stone at the bottom of the last stair, and beyond it the air changed, went thin and cold, and full of the patient attention Harry had felt at the frayed place, and felt now magnified past all bearing, because beyond that arch the hollow was no longer looking through a crack. It was through. It had risen into the deepest chamber, the founding chamber, the place where the ley lines crossed and the wheel turned, and it filled the dark beyond the arch the way water fills a drowned room, and no one who was not a warden could cross that threshold and remain a person on the other side. "This is where I stop," Dumbledore said. "I have known it since the summer, though I imagined a different ending to the knowing. I imagined myself going through that arch." He looked at it, the old man, the caretaker, and there was no bitterness in his face, only the clean grief of a thing set down. "I will not lie to you, Harry, and tell you I am certain you will come back through it. I am not certain. No one has ever done what you are about to attempt, and the last 4 who tried something smaller are in the guttering hall behind us, and they were older and readier than you. But I have watched you for 11 weeks become the one thing this castle has needed for 900 years and never had, and I find that I would rather send you through that arch with my blessing than go through it myself with my resignation, and I am ashamed of the relief in that, and I am telling you the shame so that you know I do not send you lightly." "You're not sending me," Harry said. "I'm going. There's a difference, and it matters, and it's the whole difference between what I'm about to do and what everyone in that hall did before me. They were sent, called, the wheel took them. I'm walking in on my own feet because I worked out how, and I'd rather do it that way even if it kills me, because if it kills me at least it kills a person who chose and not a strand the wheel needed." He turned to Ashgrove. "Deputy, if I don't come back, this is yours to carry. You'll know what to do with it better than anyone, because you already know the shape of carrying a thing alone that nobody will thank you for. And if I do come back, I'm going to need someone in the ministry who knows the truth and can keep it from the committees. Either way, it's yours now. The 19 names on your wall, add these 91 to them if it helps. They're the same list, people who stood between everyone else and the thing under the floor." Cordelia Ashgrove looked at him for a long moment in the failing dark, a gray woman past 50 who had come to Hogwarts to end a hidden power and was about to watch one save the world, and she did the only thing left to a person in her position that meant anything. She took out her wand, and she did not point it at him. She held it up, flat across her open palm, the old Auror's gesture of a weapon offered rather than aimed, the gesture of a guard changing. "When you come back through that arch," she said, "you'll find I've already written the report. It will say the inspection found nothing actionable and the matter is closed, and I will spend whatever's left of my career making sure it stays closed. And if anyone in that building ever comes asking about a boy at Hogwarts who's more than he should be, they will find me standing in the door of that inquiry the way you stood in the door of that gallery." Her gray eyes did not waver. "When, Mr. Potter, not if. I have buried enough people who said if. You will come back through that arch because I have decided you will, and I have found, over a long and disappointing life, that I am very rarely talked out of a decision. Go." Harry went through the arch. The founding chamber was the oldest room in the world, or felt like it, and the hollow had filled it, and Harry walked into the middle of the end of everything with 16 wardens behind his eyes and his own 2 ordinary feet on the eldest stone. It was vast beyond the reach of any light, a cavern that made the Hall of the Dead a closet, and at its center the 7 ley lines met and crossed in a knot of raw magic so bright and so terrible that Harry's warden sight showed it to him as a second sun burning underground, gold and green and arterial red, the living power of the whole island pouring inward from 7 directions. And around the knot, where the great wheel should have turned, the wheel was breaking. Harry could see it now with his own new-made eyes, the vast circular weaving of 1,000 years, the 91 strands and the gaps where strands had failed, and the terrible slackening of the whole as it lost the tension that held it taut, and pouring through every gap wrapped around the whole failing structure, drinking at the edges of the knot of ley lines, the hollow. It had no shape, and it filled the chamber. It was the unlight he had fought in the gallery, but where those had been drifting fragments, this was the whole, the source, an absence the size of the sky pressed against the breaking seal, and it had begun, at last, to drink. Harry felt it drink, felt the ley line's brightness dim by a hair as the hollow's patient bottomless thirst found the failing wheel and began, for the first time in 1,000 years, to draw the island's magic down into itself, and he knew with Everard's cold arithmetic exactly what he was watching. The end, not of Hogwarts, of magic. A hole that drank the ley lines would not stop at a school. It would drink until there was nothing left to drink, until the wells ran dry and the magic went out of the world the way warmth goes out of a corpse, and it would do it slowly over years, gently, without malice, and no one above the ground would understand why the spells were failing until the last of them failed. He stood in the founding chamber and let himself, for exactly one breath, feel the size of it. It was the discipline Brackenmore had taught him on the very first night, turned now to its hardest use, to look at the sublime and not be unmade by the looking. This was where it had all begun, where 4 founders whose names every child in Britain knew had come, young and quarreling and afraid, to do a thing so enormous that they had spent the rest of their lives pretending to the world it had only ever been a school. This was the wound at the root of the island, the place where the earth's magic ran so thick that a hole in the world had opened to drink it, and where the first warden had come, alone, before there were founders or a school or a name for what she did, and had bound the unbindable with nothing but the first craft and an unreasonable refusal to let the world end. The ley lines burned overhead like the veins of a god laid open. The wheel of 1,000 years turned and broke in the dark. The hollow filled the vault, patient, bottomless, drinking. And Harry Potter stood in the middle of it, small and warm and 91 deep, and did not look away, and did not break, and thought, with a steadiness that came from every warden in him at once, that a person is not measured by how large the thing is that they face, but by whether they keep their feet while facing it, and that he intended, whatever else the night held, to keep his feet. At the bottom of the chamber, beneath the breaking wheel, beneath the knot of ley lines, in the deepest and oldest dark, one light burned steady against the drinking dark, the first warden's grave, the keystone. Harry walked down to it across the eldest stone, through the pressing attention of the hollow, which found him, which marked him, which remembered him from the frayed place and knew him for the one warm thing that had learned to close doors, and he did not look at it, because Vane had taught him that you do not answer the enemy's attention until you are ready to make it cost them, and he was not ready yet. He had one grave left to open. The bed was not carved, that was the first thing. Every other warden in the hall lay beneath an effigy, a stone likeness, healer or mason or matron. The first warden lay beneath a slab of unworked stone, blank, smooth, older than the idea of a face, and Harry understood that she had been laid down before there was such a thing as a portrait, before there was such a thing as a name that outlived its bearer, in an age when the dead were remembered by what they had done and not by what they had looked like. This was the 91st grave, and he had never seen it, because it did not lie in the hall with the others. The hall above, the Wardens Hall he had walked for a month and called a crypt, held 90, the whole roll of those who had served the school, Brackenmore first among them and first of that roll. Marith lay apart and deeper, here at the true bottom of the rest, older than the roll and the school and the founders alike. The 91st the Count had always included, and the one no warden but a completed one could ever have reached, because the road to her ran through the hollow itself. The system surfaced its line, and even the system, that crisp and tireless interface, seemed to slow before this grave, its gold letters forming with something Harry had never seen in them, which was care. The first word. Name Marith, who bound the hollow before the founding. Legacy, the binding, the first craft, the truth of the seal. This is the keystone. Inherit, inherit, Harry said, and knelt, and laid his hand on the blank and eldest stone, and Marith, the first warden, who had bound the hollow before there was a school to hide it, came up out of 900 years and more of the dark and into him. And she was not what he had expected, and she was exactly what he had needed. She did not arrive as flood or order or opinion or spine or tempo. She arrived as understanding. Where the others had given him crafts, Marith gave him the truth beneath the crafts, and Harry, kneeling at the bottom of the world with the hollow drinking the sky above him, finally understood the whole of the thing he had been becoming. They told you the mending costs a life, Marith said, and her voice was the oldest thing Harry had ever heard, older than Brackenmore's landslide, a voice from before the language it spoke in, and it was not grave and it was not weary, it was kind and it was fierce, and it was the voice of a woman who had done an impossible thing first, when there was no one to tell her it could not be done. They told you truly. It has cost a life every time for 1,000 years, and every one of those lives was given in love, and none of them needed to be given at all. Listen to me, child, because I have waited an age to tell someone this, and there has never been anyone who could hear it. The death was never the way. The death was the failure of the way. I bound the hollow, and I did not die of it, and I lived a long life after, and I lay down here old and full of years, and the binding held after me because I had made it right. Do you understand what I am telling you? You were a prism, Harry said. The word came out of him and into the oldest dark, and above him the hollow drank, and around him the wheel broke, and Harry Potter knelt at the bottom of everything and understood. You didn't feed the wheel a life, you became the wheel. You spread the pour across the whole of yourself so no part of you burned, and you stood between the ley lines and the seal as a thing that endures instead of a thing that's used up, and you lived. And then you died old, and the ones who came after you didn't know how, because they only ever had one craft each, and one craft can't be a prism, one craft can only be a strand, and a strand burns. They've been dying for 1,000 years doing badly what you did well, because the knowing died with you and there was never anyone with enough of the crafts in one skull to do it right again. Until now, until all of you and me. Until now, said Marith, the first warden, and the fierce kindness in the ancient voice broke like a wave. You are the first since me who can do it as it was meant to be done, not fed to the wheel, woven as the wheel. A prism broad enough that the pour of the whole island cannot burn you, standing living between the deep and the world for as long as you choose to stand, and stepping back out when you are done, alive as I step back out to live your life and hand the craft to the one who comes after with the knowing intact this time, so that it never has to be relearned in blood again. That is the legacy, not the binding. The binding is only craft. The legacy is that it can be done without dying, and that the dying was always a mistake, a beautiful, terrible mistake made by people too small to hold the whole of it, and you are not too small because you are all of them at once. I tried to tell them, Marith said, and for the first time the ancient voice held something that had waited an age to be spoken, an old grief worn smooth as a river stone, the one who came after me. I taught her the binding, all of it, every part I could put into words, and she was gifted, and she was brave, and she had one craft where I had many, and when the wheel called in her time she could not spread the pour across a single crafted soul, and so she gave it a life instead, because a life will serve where breadth will not, and she died at dawn, and I could not stop her, because I was already stone, already legacy, already only a voice in a hall no one could hear. And the one after her did the same, because that was the way she had seen it done, and the one after that, and the mistake became a tradition, and the tradition became an honor, and the honor became the thing your Dumbledore was ready to die of this very year. And in 900 years not one of them had crafts enough in one skull to remember that the first time it was ever done, it was done by someone who lived. You are the first who could hear me. That is why the door opened for a child and not a master. A master has one great craft and is proud of it. You had none, and so you took all of them and became the only thing that could carry the whole. Now stand up, child, stand up, warden, and end the mistake. Legacy inherited. Marith, the first warden. You have received the binding, the first craft, the truth of the seal. Wardens inherited, 91 of 91. Lineage complete. You are the warden of Hogwarts. The last line hung in the oldest dark, and it did not fade, and beneath it, all at once, the remaining 74 graves Harry had never knelt beside gave up their legacies together, the whole of the lineage pouring into him in a single overwhelming flood, because Marith was the keystone, and the keystone had turned, and the arch of the whole line closed at last into one living vessel. 74 lives, 74 crafts, 1,000 years of wardens, and Harry Potter knelt at the bottom of the world and took all of them, and did not break, because Marith had been right, because he was broad enough now, 91 deep, a prism the size of a lineage, and the flood that would have drowned any single soul was, to a soul that had deliberately made itself into 100, only the last of the water rising to a level it had been climbing toward for 11 weeks. He stood up. He was the warden of Hogwarts, and the hollow, feeling the last light in the chamber kindle to a blaze, feeling the keystone turn, feeling the one warm thing it had marked and remembered become suddenly, impossibly, the whole of the lineage alive in a single body, stopped drinking the sky and turned the whole of its patient, bottomless attention on Harry and reached for him. It did not reach the way the wraiths in the gallery had reached. It reached with everything it was. The whole absence the size of the sky bent down toward the single lit figure at the bottom of the chamber, and it offered Harry the thing it had offered every warm thing since before the Founders, the thing that was not an attack because it did not know how to hate, the erasing piece, the gentle subtraction, the end of the long cold effort of being a self. Harry felt it reach into him, felt the unlight find the edges of his crowded mind, felt his 91 wardens and his own living will and all the effort of holding them thin for a moment, toward the offered quiet, and it was the most dangerous moment of his life, more dangerous than the second night, more dangerous than the throat of the gallery, because the hollow was not trying to overwhelm his choosing. It was trying to make him choose it. It showed him gently how easy it would be to stop. How the holding could simply end, how he had carried so much for so long and could set it down, all of it, the door and the dead and the wheel and the weight, and be nothing and be at peace and never once be tired again. For one breath Harry Potter stood at the bottom of the world, and the offered quiet was the most beautiful thing he had ever been shown, and it was not only him it reached. He felt the hollows offer find the 91, and he felt them waver, all of them, because the dead in him had spent 9 centuries holding, and holding is a labor, and the thing that stands before the tired laborer and offers rest speaks a language the tired know in their bones. Every warden in him had died at the wheel or lain down beside it, and every one of them, for one terrible breath, remembered how heavy the holding was, and leaned minutely toward the quiet, 91 exhausted souls and one living boy all tilted for an instant toward the same soft ending, and Harry felt himself begin to go with them, felt the choosing start to slip from his hand into the great gentle current of 100 wills that were, all of them at once, so very tired. This was the moment the second night had rehearsed him for. This was the crowd, not frayed by battle but seduced by peace, and it was worse than the battle, because the battle had wanted to overwhelm him, and this only wanted to be agreed with, and agreement is the easiest thing in the world to give when you are tired and a kind voice tells you that you have earned your rest. He did not agree. He reached into the tilting current of 100 wills, and he found, at the center of it, the one thing that was only his, the 16-year-old who had followed a pressure in the stone because the castle had leaned into his hand like a dog that had decided to trust him. And he held to that, the smallest and youngest and least of all the wills in him, and he made it the loudest because the choosing was his, and he would not let 1,000 years of exhausted greatness take it from him. Then Dyles spoke, gentle and fierce, the healer who had decided in the middle of 10,000 deaths that mercy was a skill. That is not peace, child, that is the absence of a person who could have been at peace. I have sat with the truly dying, and I have sat with the ones who only wish to be, and I know the difference, and so do you. And vain, crisp, exhilarated, the war warden who had never once been afraid, it offers you rest because it cannot beat you awake. That is not a temptation. That is a surrender flag flown by a thing that has never surrendered in its life, which means it is losing, which means now, boy, now, while it is begging. And Merith, oldest and last, the first warden, kind and fierce, and finally, after an age, not alone, you are not too small to hold the whole of it. I made certain of that when I laid down the legacy. Now do the thing I could not, because there was only ever one of me and there are 91 of you. Do not only bind it, end the need to. And Harry chose, he did not choose the quiet. He chose the weight, the whole enormous weight, 91 lives and a living will and a world that needed holding, and he took the hollows reaching, the whole absence the size of the sky bent down and offered to him. And instead of refusing it, he accepted it and turned it, in the oldest trick Vane had ever taught and the deepest truth Merith had ever known, from a thing that reached into him to a thing he had gathered in. He wove himself into the wheel. It was the most enormous act any wizard had performed in 1,000 years, and it took, from the outside, no time at all. Harry stepped his living will into the breaking weaving where the strands had failed, and he spread the pour of the 7 ley lines across the whole 91-fold breadth of himself. A prism the size of a lineage, and where a single warden would have charred in a night he did not char at all, because the load that crushes one hand is nothing to 100, and the wheel, feeling a living strand woven into it whole and unburning for the first time since Merith, took up the tension it had lost and began slowly to turn again. He would try afterward to find words for what it was to be the prism, and he would fail because there were no words for it in any language he knew, and the nearest he ever came was this, that he became, for the space of that working, the place where the whole magic of an island passed through a single human choice on its way to holding up the world. The 7 ley lines poured their brute enormity into him, more power than any wizard had ever touched and lived, more than had killed 90 of the 91, and it did not burn him because he was not one lens but 100. And it passed through the 91 blazing facets of him and came out the far side not as raw flood but as the fine sustaining light of the seal, shaped, gentled, made merciful, and Harry stood at the center of the passing and was not consumed. He was a window the size of a soul with the sun of the whole earth pouring through it, and the pouring did not break the glass, because the glass had spent 11 weeks learning to be many, and a window of 100 panes carries a light that would shatter a single sheet. This was the truth Merith had died old to prove, and the others had died young for lack of. This was the prism, and it endured. And then Harry did the thing that had never been done, the thing Merith had made him promise, the thing that was his alone because only a warden who was 91 people and a living boy could have both the craft to attempt it and the will to survive it. He did not wall the hollow out. He had learned in the gallery that you cannot destroy a hole and you cannot forever hold one, that a wall only postpones, so he did not build a better wall. He looked at the hollow, the whole patient bottomless absence pressed against his newly turning wheel, and he understood it, finally, with Merith's understanding and Everard's sight and Brackenmoor's knowledge of load, and he saw that its endless hunger, its bottomless pull, its terrible thirst to fill was not only a danger, it was a force. And a force can be a load, and a load can be borne, and a load borne rightly does not break a structure, it holds it up. He wove the hollow into the wheel. He took the absence's endless pull, the thirst that would have drunk the world, and he made it the tension that held the seal taut, so that the more the hollow hungered the tighter the wheel drew, the harder it pulled the stronger the binding became. The whole devouring appetite of the thing turned from the force that broke the seal into the very force that sustained it. A knot that pulls tighter the more you strain against it, an enemy set to hold the gate it had spent an age trying to break. The hollow drank, and its drinking now fed the wheel that caged it. The hollow pulled, and its pulling now held the strands it pulled against. It could not stop because it did not know how to stop wanting, and its wanting was, from this moment and forever, the engine of its own imprisonment. The wound in the world was not healed because you cannot heal a hole, but it was set to work. It was made to hold itself. And a seal that is held taut by the very thing it holds needs no lives fed into it, ever again, because it feeds itself forever on the appetite of the thing it cages. The wheel turned. It turned faster than it had turned in 300 years, fast and true and taut, the 7 ley lines pouring their power through the living prism of a 16-year-old and out into the sustaining light of a seal that no longer thinned because it no longer bore its load alone. The failed strands healed, drawn shut by the new tension, 91 strands and one living one, and the risen light came back into the chamber and back up the strands into the guttering hall of the dead, and every anchor stone, every effigy of every poured-out warden kindled again, brighter than before, 91 small suns blazing back to life, because the dead who had spent themselves to buy Harry his minutes felt the wheel turn true beneath them and knew, in whatever way the dead know things, that it had worked, that the mistake was ended, that no one would ever again be poured out into the dark, and their light was not the steady patience it had been for 1,000 years. It was joy. 91 graves full of joy, blazing in the deep, and at the center of it a living boy woven into a wheel he had learned to turn, holding the whole cold hunger of the world in a knot it could never untie, and living. He stepped back out. That was the thing no one had believed possible, the thing Marith had promised, the thing the death cost had made everyone forget could be done. When the wheel was turning true and the hollow was bound into its own holding and the seal needed him no longer to sustain it, Harry Potter withdrew his living will from the weaving, the way you take your hand from a spinning top once it has found its balance, and the wheel turned on without him, self-sustaining, taut, eternal, and he was not woven into it, and he was not poured out into it, and he was not dead. He was standing on the eldest stone at the bottom of the world, 91 wardens quiet and blazing behind his eyes, the warden of Hogwarts alive, and the founding chamber was full of the risen light, and the hollow was a knot that held itself, and above him, all the way up through 1,000 years of rock, the castle stood on a foundation that would not fail again. He walked back up to the arch on his own 2 feet. Dumbledore and Ashgrove were where he had left them in the failing dark that was failing no longer, the risen light pouring back up the stairs to meet them. And when Harry came through the arch, alive, 91 deep and entirely himself, the old man made a sound that was not quite a word, and Cordelia Ashgrove, who had said when and not if and been right, closed her eyes for exactly 1 second, which was the most she would ever allow herself, and opened them and said, "Report stands." Matter closed in a voice that shook only on the last word and then not at all. They did not speak much on the climb up. There was too much, and it was too large, and some things are best carried in silence between people who were there. The Hall of the Dead, when they passed through it, blazed with its 91 restored suns, and Harry stopped in the middle of it, among the graves of the mason and the healer and the manipulator and the watcher and the keeper and the matron and the warmaster and the first of all of them, and he felt them settle in him, not gone, not silent. A council convened for the rest of his life behind his eyes, quiet now, resting, blazing in their beds and blazing in his skull at once. And he understood that he would never be alone again in the way he had been alone, and that this was a gift and a weight, and that the two, as Brackenmore had told him on the first night, were not so different as the young believe. At the top of the last stair in the round office where 91 portraits hung, Dumbledore stopped and turned, and did a thing Harry had not expected and would remember all his life. The old man inclined his head. Not the nod of a teacher to a promising student, nor the courtesy of an old man to a young one. It was the deep formal bow of an office handed on, a caretaker to the warden he had waited 30 years to be relieved by, and every portrait on the walls, all 91 of them, awake now and blazing in their frames as their originals blazed in the deep, inclined their painted heads with him. "Office of Headmaster I will keep," Dumbledore said, "for I find I am not quite done being useful, and a school still needs a foolish old man to sign its forms and eat its feasts and pretend to know less than he does. But the office of warden was never mine, Harry. I only ever held it in trust for the one who could truly carry it, and I have carried it badly and alone and afraid, and I am so very glad to set it down." He straightened. "It is yours now, not as a burden laid on a child. As a thing a man has earned and chosen and made new. Marith's mistake is ended. No one lies down in that wheel again from this night to the end of the world, and the reason is standing in my office in his school socks looking like he could sleep for a week." Something that was almost the old twinkle returned, worn and real. "You should sleep for a week. I shall write McGonagall a note excusing you from everything. I have wanted an excuse to abuse that privilege for years." Cordelia Ashgrove did not stay for the dawn. She gathered her Aurors, and she saw them sworn to the silence one more time, and she stood a moment in the entrance hall where 2 days before she had read her order aloud, and she looked at Harry with the gray level assessment that had not changed and never would, because it was the whole of what made her herself. "I came here to end a hidden power," she said. "I am leaving having hidden one." My whole career, that trade would have looked like corruption to me, and I would have been right, and I am doing it anyway, and I want you to understand what that costs a person like me, so that you understand what I am trusting you with. She held out her hand, and Harry took it, and her grip was an auror's, dry and exact. You will not make me regret it. You will use what you are to hold the door, and never to open when you have no business opening, and on the day you feel the 91 begin to weigh more than the boy, you will go to Albus or to me, and you will say so, because a power that stops telling anyone the truth is the exact thing I have spent my life hunting, and I would hate, Mr. Potter, to have to come back. A pause, and under the iron, briefly, something that had been buried under 19 names for 11 years and was not quite dead after all. Thank you for my life, and for the 19 I could not save, who are, I think, a little more at rest tonight than they were, because someone finally stood in the door in time. Goodbye. She went, and Harry watched her go through Everard's sight all the way to the gates and beyond, a grey woman walking north to south through a grey dawn to write a false report that was the truest thing she had ever done, and he did not stop watching until she had passed out of even a warden's seeing, and then he let the sight fall shut and turned back to the school. The castle above did not know what had happened beneath it. That was the strangest part and the rightest. Harry came up through the school in the last dark before dawn, and it was only a school, 400 children sleeping in their towers, the enchanted ceiling of the great hall showing the last stars, the moving staircases dreaming their slow stone dreams, and not one of them knew that the ground they slept on had nearly gone out from under the world, or that it never would now, or that the reason was climbing the marble stair in his socks with the whole lineage of their protectors quiet behind his eyes. The ministry net still hung across the walls, sullen and orange, and it did not chime for him, because a boy who was 91 wardens and a living will had long since learned to move as a part of the building, and because the building now was his to move through, as no one had moved through it since Marith laid the first stone. Nia Fenwick found him at breakfast 3 hours later, because she found him at breakfast most mornings, and she had a question already halfway out of her mouth about a bit of wandwork, and she stopped and looked at him and tilted her head. "You look different," she said. "You look like you finally slept." "I did," Harry said. It was true. He had slept 2 hours, and he felt he had slept 100 years, the good full sleep of a thing set right. "Best sleep I've had all term. About time." She sat down across from him, unbothered, 13 and stubborn and entirely alive, the coin-shaped scar on her ribs under her jumper the mark of the first door he had ever closed, and she started in on the wandwork question, and Harry listened and helped her with it, slowing the turn, letting the shape finish arriving before she fixed it. And down the table Ron argued about Quidditch, and Hermione read a book against the water jug, and the post owls came in a rush of wings, and the ordinary morning went on, and beneath it all, holding it all up, a wheel turned taut and true in the deep, and a bound thing hungered forever into the knot of its own cage, and 91 wardens blazed in their beds in the risen light, resting at last, and the 92nd sat at the Gryffindor table eating toast, alive. A 16-year-old boy who had followed a pressure in the stone down a stair, a map could not see, and had come by the long road all the way home. Chapter 7 End.